Hey guys, tonight we're walking into Bermondsey, London. The year is 1850, and your job smells like a dare someone lost. You work a tannery yard where hides arrive salted and stiff as doors, then sink into white liquor, lime water strong enough to strip hair, pride, and the thin skin between your knuckles. You will handle wood paddles, dull knives, and pits that bite. You will learn which burns you rinse, and which you simply carry home. What happens to a city that tans its leather beside its bread and beer? Why does the smell of lime and rot cling so tightly that even sleep avoids it? I'll show you from the ground minute to minute without flinching because I've already ruined a pair of boots getting these details right. If you enjoy this kind of misery, tap the button and let the bell earn its wages. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from, or rate the smell out of 10. Now step down into the yard with me. No comfort, just work. You wake before light with your hands already awake, tight, sore, peppered with thin white cracks that sting when you stretch them. The smell has beaten the sun up. It waits in your room like a stray. Shirt first, thick and faded, then a wool waistcoat to pretend at warmth, then trousers you no longer mind staining because the stain stopped being new. Your boots keep the shape of yesterday's damp. A rag lives near the basin. You wet it. Wipe your face and leave grey on the cloth that wasn't there when you tried last night. Bread, heel hard. A sip of small beer to chase the chalk taste off your tongue. You check your knuckles for open places and rub a little tallow in as if fat could bargain with lime. It can't, but hope makes small trades at dawn. The walk takes you past the river's cold breath and the carry yards where carts rattle out brined hides under stitched canvas. A dog follows, believing you need herding. Women scrub steps, then pause when you pass. Not because you're dangerous, but because the air around you is. The buildings lean like teeth. Gutters speak quietly. Smoke hangs when the wind is shy. You nod to a fellow from the beam house. Scarf chalk dusted. Hands wrapped where lime found the same soft skin you guard. A boy you know only as Cuff darts ahead with a hook twice his height and a grin that says he will one day regret it. The yard gate is open, always. The foreman's bell is a rasp and a habit. You step inside and the smell steps closer. First duty, get the new lot to drink. Hides come off the cart like reluctant beasts, heavy, greasy with salt, edged with stiff fat that cuts when it wants. 2 of you catch, 1 of you guides, all of you grunt. You slide the first hide into the soaks, plain water in a sunken timbered pit, and push it under with a bar that feels heavier each minute. Water clouds to tea and then to stew. Swollen leather rises like a lung wanting air. You press again. Your knuckles fizz where yesterday's lime reached under the skin. The foreman calls times by habit and guess. You lift, turn and sink the hides until the cold in your bones feels like a tool in your hand. The cart leaves lighter, the pit groans fuller. The lime pits wait, white as winter and twice as mean. You stir them with paddles fixed to poles. The liquor is thick, chalky, quick to spit when something sinks wrong. Lime fogs above the surface and sits inside your nose, tasting of pennies ground with eggs. You work with the sleeves rolled, but the splash still finds the wrist, that soft border where skin thinks it is safe. It opens you without blood. Hides go down on ropes, weighted with stones. And you mark the times with a nail scratch on the post because clocks don't help if your arm forgets. When you pull the bar, the liquor climbs your sleeves like it has an appointment. Someone says to oil your hands at dinner. Someone laughs. You manage a smile so it doesn't count as a complaint. Unhairing is the clean lie of the job. After the lime, you drag the hides to the beams and the hair slips under your blade like wet straw. You take long pulls, shoulders low, knife rocking, the way someone showed you when you were new. The hair and scent lime fall in clumps into channels that carry it toward barrels bound for soap boilers and glue men. Everything is used. Nothing smells better for it. You pause to wet the blade, test a patch with your thumb, and the thumb is punished for pride with a sting that blooms slow. The beam is slick. The floor is slicker. You plant your feet as if growing roots might keep you upright. A bell rings somewhere for dinner you will not taste. Dinner is not a dinner, just a pause called by custom. You set your knife down across the beam and rinse your hands in a bucket that has stopped pretending to be clean. Lime leaves a grain on your skin like ground shell. You rub a dab of dripping into the knuckles anyway, because superstition counts as medicine if you repeat it enough. Bread again, a wedge of onion that wakes your eyes, and a swallow of porter if someone remembered to fill the jug before the tap went stingy. Cuff steals a heel and a grin, and the foreman pretends not to see, because a boy who eats works better than a boy who faints. Talk is small, a man whose boots burst, a wife due soon, a rumour that the river will bring in cheap foreign hides. You fold a rag twice and press it into your waistband where the knife's handle rubs. The bell lifts its tired voice. You stand, flex your hands until the cracks complain, and go back to the beam. The pause sits behind you like a chair you're not allowed to own. Fleshing comes next, and it's honest work in the way a fall is honest. You brace the hide on the curve of the beam and take the long draw with a crescent knife, shaving off gristle, and the translucent film that makes leather stiff later. The blade wants to skate, the beam wants to shrug, your shoulders want to be elsewhere. You plant your feet and learn the rhythm, pull, breathe, set, pull, until the hide starts to talk through the steel. A slip would open your wrist. You pinch the handle tighter whenever you feel the edge whisper sideways. Fat peels away like candle ends and drops into a wooden trough for the soapmen who love your waist and despise your smell. Steam rises from your breath and sits under the brim of your cap. Someone coughs behind you and you wait to feel the bump that means the floor reached up. It doesn't. You keep the stroke steady and pretend you never thought about falling. Now the bait. You could call it by its Sunday name, drench. But the yard is not a church and the pit does not forgive. Dog dung scraped from lanes at dawn and pigeon droppings collected by boys with sacks and long poles, steeped in warm water until it turns the wrong sort of brown. You stir with ash sticks and keep your mouth shut. Ammonia climbs the throat and makes the eyes leak. The first time you thought you were weeping, now you know the air is doing it for you. The hides go in after lime to soften and loosen what the liquor made proud, and you walk a pole under and through to keep them from slumping into themselves. Your boots find the slats by habit. The scum kisses leather and tries to stay. Cuff watches from the rail, nose wrinkled, learning that some work is a joke that lasts an hour and some is a vow you refuse to break. You lift a corner, feel the change in weight and nod. The bait has chewed enough. The yard agrees by smelling worse. Tanning proper is a calendar, not a task. Oak bark comes in ground and damp, the dust like weak tea when it catches your tongue. You shovel it into the pits with wooden scoops, building a bed, then lay the hides with care so the grain doesn't kiss brick and remember it. More bark over top, more liquor, a slow flood of brown that stains the day. These are the handler's rounds, from weak to strongest ooze, week by week. The hides moving like pupils through your grades. A windlass creaks as you raise a sling of skins and your back answers with arithmetic you never learned at school. You mark posts with nails for each shift. A small forest of scratches that means time is happening even when you can't feel it. Tannin grips the hand if you dare to test it. You do once and carry the stain like an unpaid bill. The foreman checks the sheet, names, weights, promised buyers, and says nothing when the numbers line up like geese. Silence counts as praise. Bermondsey keeps its own weather, damp even on days the newspapers swear were fine. St Saviour's dock coughs up things that once were vegetables and now are opinions. The leather market down the way shouts through thin walls, buyers slapping hides like bakers testing loaves. Women bring kettles for the gelatin skim that boils off scraps, trading news for ladles. A cooper's yard argues with a farrier 2 doors over, iron ringing against oak until a constable wanders through and remembers an errand elsewhere. Children play at rivers with gutter water and bark chips for boats. They hold their breath when you pass, then forget and laugh because forgetting is a job too. The pump on Tanner Street gives water with a taste of tin and yesterday. Men swear it's better than the Thames, which is like saying a kick is better than a fist. You wipe your nose on your sleeve and decide they're both right. The smell here isn't a visitor, it pays rent. Toward dusk, you clean the tools the way you wish someone would clean you. Knives rasp against the steel. The noise shivers and then signalling steadies, and you test the edge with the nail of your thumb like a man who trusts habits more than saints. Beams get sluiced, pits get stirred for the night. Ropes are coiled in patient loops. You rinse your hands in vinegar water, foreman's trick, and it bites in a more civilized way, telling the lime to sit. Tallow on the cracks once more, a smear that vanishes as fast as the hope that came with it. You scrape your boots against a brick step until the yard lets go, then scrape again, because it never really does. The bell sounds off, a flat note, and men answer by becoming quieter. You set your cap straight, collect your bundle of rag, and look back at the pits the way you might glance at a sleeping dog. Respect, and the knowledge that it isn't truly asleep. You take the long way home because the short way passes the glue men's boil house, and you've already earned your share of evening perfume. Bermondsey turns its alleys inside out at dusk. Costermongers shout oranges soft as bruises, a rag and bone man sings for nails, and the gin shop doors leak talk that starts friendly and ends sideways. Smoke sits low, too tired to climb. Your boots scratch chalk from the step and then carry it down the lane anyway, leaving tiny white commas that say where you've been. A woman beats a rug with more patience than anger. The dust rises, smells you, and settles again. A ferryman swears at an eddy, as if the river keeps a ledger. You pass a marine store where rope goes to be born again and a cobbler who looks at your boots the way a doctor eyes a cough. Children crouch over gutter fleets, bark-chip ships tacking in filthy wind. They look up, pinch their noses, and then wave, because children forgive what they don't yet have to do. The sky rusts toward night. You reach your door feeling like a walking pit with a hat on. Your room is a box with a bed, a chair, a basin, and a window that keeps more out than it lets in. The landlord swears the chimney draws, the wall swears otherwise. You set the basin with pump water, pour in a spoon of vinegar, and lower your hands as if into judgment. The sting is quick and bright, then dull, then a memory that will speak again when you sleep. You scrub with a rag until colour comes up, brown from bark, grey from yard air, a faint green that belongs to no leaf. Your shirt steams on the chair back like a grumpy ghost. You dab tallow into the worst cracks and watch it vanish as if the skin swallowed it in fear. The nail on your middle finger carries a crescent where the beam bit. You file it smooth with a scrap of sandstone. A draught runs across the floor like a small animal. You feed the stove 2 bits of coal and a hope. The room answers with a breath that almost counts as heat. Supper is a compromise between hunger and coin. Potatoes boiled until they surrender, a heel of bread, a shred of pickled herring that argues with the vinegar on your hands. If trade was kinder, there'd be eel pie from the man under the arch. Pepper sharp enough to enough to bully the river out of your mouth. A lodger named Daylight, nobody remembers why, leans in your doorway to talk about a man at the leather market who swears American hides are cheaper and softer. You nod as if that's a mercy. Cheaper usually means someone else is starving for you. He asks whether the bate burned today. You say it sang. He laughs, coughs, and tells you cholera took his cousin last summer and left his aunt to argue with empty rooms. You pass him the jug. He drinks like a man extinguishing a small fire. Outside, a barrel hoops itself down the lane, and someone claims the street with a song that forgets the words whenever the verse grows proud. Bed is straw that remembers other backs. You shake it for form's sake and watch 2 fleas abandon courtesy. The blanket is army cast and honest about its itch. You lie down and your hands begin to speak in pulses. The left complains about the beam, the right about the knife, both about the lime. The day keeps working inside your head. Ropes creak, windlass sings, a hide rises slow and heavy like a thought you can't push away. You doze and fall into a white pit that isn't water, isn't lime, just a flavour that scrapes. You wake once with your fingers curled like claws around nothing. The street mutters, "Late cart," a cat swearing at love, someone discovering the bottom of a bottle. You turn your pillow to the cold side and smell the yard there too. It followed you home. It bought no ticket. A distant church bell counts too slow to matter. You let it be. Dawn scrapes the window with a grey fingernail and you're already up, because lying still just lets the aches introduce each other. The street has rinsed but not cleaned. Cart ruts shine like fish backs. At the yard, the foreman points with his chin before his voice wakes. A splash climbed a man's sleeve on the night turn and found the elbow bend. He stands with vinegar cloths and a mouth that keeps saying "fool" to no one in particular. You rinse your hands and take the pole, working the lime slow until its surface stops sulking. Cuff arrives late, hair in negotiations with his cap, and you put him on the safe side of the beam. You show him the wrist wrap, the way to turn the blade so the edge answers you rather than surprises you. He nods like a boy trying not to be a boy. The foreman grunts something that could be praise if you feed it twice a day. Tools have tempers like men, and you learn to keep them in conversation. The beam knife gets a lick on the steel until it sings the thin note that means truth. You rub beeswax on handles so wet, hands don't teach you a lesson. Aprons are leather and useless against time, but they turn a splash and give you enough of a second to be clever. Some men wrap wrists with rag under twine to guard that treacherous soft place. You do it now, late to wisdom, but not refusing it. Oak bark dust sits in your hair like dull snow and stains your cuffs the colour of strong tea. Ropes are checked where they chafe over the posts. You splice a tired strand and feel better than a sermon. Someone starts a work song, not to cheer but to measure the pulls. You keep time. The yard reluctantly keeps faith. Scudding is the part nobody brags about. After unhairing, you return the hides to the beam and scrape what the lime loosened, but didn't surrender. Short roots, slime, the grain's little lies. The scudder's knife isn't sharp like the beam blade. It's broad and stubborn, meant to push more than cut. You lean your weight into the drawer, lift the heel of the blade just so, and feel the hide reply when you get the angle right. Your boots find purchase on a floor that would rather advise than assist. The beam's curve meets the shoulder of the skin. You follow muscle maps you don't need to see. Slips happen when the pit water dries to paste on the beam, and your hands forget they're tired. You sand the beam with pumice, rinse, and start again. Scud drops in grey ropes to a gutter, where a boy with a shovel gathers value nobody else wants. You keep your wrists low, your back quiet, and your pride dull. You prefer dull to dead. Sheepskins arrive from the fellmongers next door, greasy with lanolin that pretends to be kindness until it turns every step into a question. You handle them different. Thinner grain, easier tear, a temper like wet paper. Some go to the toers who work alum and salt into white leather. For gloves and bookbinders, they talk of softness like it's a church rule and complain about your bark stains. Moroccos for fine shoes take sumac in separate pits that smell less like murder and are more like tea brewed too long. Calf goes to upper leather, cow to soles, horse to where a strap must not fail. The yard is a neighbourhood under one sky. Fellmongers, curriers, toers, gluemen, coopers, and the old bark grinder that coughs dust into everyone's bread. You wipe your hands on your apron and accept that everything touches everything here, and nothing loses the smell. Wages come on Saturday, coins in a foreman's palm that can warm or chill your week by how long they linger there. Day labourers get what the bell says. Handlers claim a little more because time lives in the pits with the hides. Piecework for some tasks turns men into clocks with blades. Rent knocks first on Monday, louder if Sunday went to gin. The pawnbroker on Long Lane knows your shirts by name. He holds them like a patient judge and redeems them like a weather report. You pay for coal before meat because cold argues better than hunger. When work thins, you skip dinner and pretend that vinegar water counts as a cure. Cuff asks if the foreman ever raises a man for being careful. You tell him care keeps you breathing long enough to be noticed, which is the closest thing to a raise you trust. Rent never forgets. Injuries are a language the yard speaks without effort. Lime bites wrists and the crook of the elbow, places where skin is tender and trust's wrong. Cuts from the beam knife look small until bark turns them permanent. Infection starts as a warmth you mistake for heat from work. Then a red thread walks up the arm toward the armpit, and you visit a doctor with a bottle for courage. He will lance, or he will shrug, and either way the yard will ask where you were. Vinegar rinses help, so do lard and clean rags, when you can afford them, and when the rag was truly clean before it tried. Men swear by tobacco juice, goose grease, and a prayer to whichever saint watches fools with knives. Cholera took men last year and left empty boots against doors. You still avoid the pump that tasted of rumours. You carry your own tin cup and pretend the river can be reasoned with. Drying and dressing move the work upstairs where the air learns a different job. Hides come from the strongest bark lickers and hang in drying lofts on laths, the windows cracked just enough to keep rot from getting ideas. You stretch them on frames, tie with cords, and rub neat's foot oil into the surface until your fingers shine. Curriers take over with slickers of glass and steel, compressing, smoothing, forcing the grain to behave. A pair of men run the jack, two big rollers that eat leather and spit it flatter, turning the crank with a slow steadiness that feels like prayer. Dubbin made from tallow, oil and wax works into soles while blacking, lamp black mixed with oil, gives uppers their parade face. The room smells of smoke and warm fat and something like fish when the oil is cheap. You wipe your hands and the rag becomes a tool all by itself. The leather begins to look like something a buyer could love. Buyer's day is theatre with knives put away. Men with measuring chains and opinions arrive from the leather market, tapping, bending, pressing thumbs into grain to feel spring and truth. They talk of thickness and draw lines on your week with chalk. A hide too thin goes to bookbinders, too stiff, to soles, just right, to a name you will never see stamped on a boot you will never wear. They argue over colour the bark gave, whether the soak went honest, whether the currier kept his temper. The foreman stands with his ledger and a face that learned not to nod. You and two others trim edges with half-moon knives, square off bellies that won't make good straps, stack by size and tie with hemp. A porter chalks the lot number on a slate and the pile leaves with a creak you feel in your shoulders. The money won't raise your meat, but it will keep the coal box from echoing. You walk home through air that can't forget you, and you let it remember. Sunday does not forgive the smell, it only asks it to whisper. You wash shirt and hands with lye soap that bites almost as hard as lime, then rinse in pump water until your fingers pucker like old fruit. The basin blooms grey. You throw it into the gutter, and it comes back as steam. Church bells say respectable things to people who don't work with pits. You stand near the door to spare the congregation and mouth a hymn with a throat that still remembers ammonia. A woman behind you coughs and pulls her shawl in as if that could build a wall. Fears, the street markets flirt with decency. Hot pies, cracked cups, a man selling combs from a tray. You test one, think of hair slipping from hides and put it back. At home you air the straw tick in a thin sun and beat your apron with a stick until dust gives up. The room smells like your work wearing a different hat. Peace is quiet, not clean. Your court keeps its own ledger of noises. Tin mugs, a kettle, a neighbour who sings to her child because the child won't be sung to by anyone else. On wash lines, shirts hang like surrender flags. Yours drip bark tea from the cuffs. A rat inspects the yard and decides your boot is a hill worth climbing. You shoo it with a broom and it shames you by not hurrying. A hawker calls soap flakes and paper twists. You buy two and wonder whether you just paid to itch. Daylight repairs a stool with 3 nails that don't agree with each other. He tells you a man from the board came last week to ask politely about drains. The man took notes and breathed shallow. You nod and say nothing, because drains aren't your department until they fail. You oil your beam blade with a breath of tallow, wipe it clean and wrap it in sacking like a child you actually like. On Monday, the yard pretends it's new and the pits laugh. The townhouse windows are opened a hand's width to take the damp away and keep the hides from flowering into ruin. You check the windlass pulls, test the ropes with a pull that tells the truth by how it complains, and rub beeswax into a splice so friction will shake hands rather than fight. Cuff arrives early, proud of it, and you give him the light tasks that still hurt if he is foolish. You show him how to ride the hide's weight with his hip when he drags, using bone and habit instead of back. He learns fast, then too fast, and your hand finds his wrist before the blade can find the same. You tie his wrap tighter, and tell him a dull day is a safe day. He grins like he believes you. The foreman grunts once, maybe the closest he gets to thank you. Heat changes the yard into soup. Summer thickens every breath. The bait pits go from offence to sermon. Flies write their names on your arms and leave ink that moves. Hide salt burn if carts wait in the sun, so you rush the soak and risk a slip. Men work in shirt sleeves and swear at the air like it failed a promise. You keep a rag under the cap brim to drink sweat before it blinds you. Bark liquor turns sweet in heat, and sweet is worse. You stir more often, cursing kindness. By noon the yard smells like a decision nobody can reverse. A barrel of scrap slumps, collapses, and births a wet, seeking sound that everyone decides not to hear. You step careful, you keep rhythm, and you save your curses for the windlass when it sticks on the upstroke. Heat teaches you that breath has weight. Winter is a different argument. Lime grows shy and cold, that clots and needs patience you don't have spare. Your breath fogs the beam and hides become stones that pretend to be leather. You warm your hands at the gloom end steam and pretend you're grateful. The drying loft windows close to slits, and still, the draught finds your wrists. You line pit edges with pine boughs to keep frost from teasing the bricks apart. The windlass creaks like an old man. You answer with tallow on the ratchet, and a promise to God you won't bargain with later. The river wears ice like a bad idea. Barges crack lanes through with poles and swearing. You learn to wrap ankles because the floor steals heat through boots, and you learn to drink mild hot ale without pretending it tastes good. Cold makes every task honest and shorter than your temper. At the alehouse you sit near the door so your coat can apologise. Men from the rope walk lean along with their pints, forearms banded by twist work, and you trade complaints because trade needs small bridges. A lighterman says the tide lied and he ran his barge across a sand that wasn't there. A woman sets down plates that were once hot and still hope to be. You tip because she does not flinch at your smell. Talk circles, wages, meat, and whether the market will tighten before Christmas. Somebody tells the story of a man who fell into the lime pit 6 years ago and came out swearing gentler and drinking vinegar by choice. You all laugh the way men laugh when the thing could have been them. You finish early, step into night air that forgives nothing, and walk home with a body that is already writing tomorrow's list. Pure finders work the dawn before you, sacks over shoulders, sticks for that scraping, noses that gave up arguing years ago. They sell pure by the stone, dog dung, turned commodity, and the yard keeps a corner bin where boys empty the grey harvest. You haggle out of habit and pay what the foreman says anyway, because bait without pure is just warm water making promises. The bin wakes when the sun hits it. Steam rises, sharp as an insult. And you stir quick so the air forgives you sooner. A lad breaks lumps with a paddle, face wrapped in a rag that smells like the rag. You think of the city as a machine that eats everything slow. Street sweepings, horse drop-ins, broken leather, even yesterday's dead cat if the glue men are hungry for bones. Nothing is waste if somebody can afford to remember it. You mark the bin's level with chalk. It sinks by noon. That means work, not luck. The beam house carries its own parliament. Men vote with grunts, curses, and how they show you a trick without charging for it. Signals matter. 2 taps on the beam for help, a pole lifted for mind the splash, a swear you only use when the rope complains like it will snap. Cuff learns the list the hard way. He walks too near the pit edge and you catch his collar with the pole hook. After that he stays 1 foot back from everything that could decide his future. You teach him to listen to liquor because it speaks. Lime hisses different when a hide enters wrong. Bark oozes like a pot ready to spit and must be appeased with a slower draw. The foreman pretends he can't hear the tunes men hum to keep time. He can. Time kept is injuries spared. You set your knife across the beam with teeth inward, a small law that saves skin. The smell shapes your city more than the river does. Landlords rent to men like you because other tenants won't. Gin shops welcome you near doors and send the weak stomach to the back. On the omnibus, a ring opens around your coat like a polite miracle. Churches give you side aisles and kind looks that last until the hymn ends. A woman once held her handkerchief like a flag between herself and you moved because you had no wish to fight cotton. Children ask why you smell like pennies and eggs. You tell them you work near water that bites. They accept it the way children accept rain. You scrub hard and wear clean on Sunday, but the yard keeps a spare shirt of yours in the air and lends it back when you step outside. You stop noticing until someone else does. Then you remember all at once. Food is a map of wages and weather. Morning might be bread and small beer. Noon a slab of cheese with onion sharp enough to bully your nose. Night the glory of an eel pie if the weak behaved. Offal is cheap and honest. You stew lights and liver with pepper until it forgets what it used to be. Tea sneaks in when coin allows, strong and a little smoky, mercy in a tin can. Water is a rumour you don't trust, so you boil or brew and keep a jug with a cloth over the mouth to pretend at decency. In summer, you buy cherries that stain your fingers until they look like work again. In winter, you gnaw carrots that crunch like apologies. Street stalls sell hot potatoes in bond of paper, and you hold them as much for warmth as for salt. Pepper is not a luxury, it's a negotiation with the world. Clothes are tools that pretend to be garments. Your cap keeps bark dust from taking root in your hair. A rag under the brim steals sweat before it blinds you. A leather apron hangs from your shoulders like a door you drag into every room. When it grows tired, the courier sells you a tired one from his pile and calls it charity. Moleskin trousers stand up on their own if you let them. You don't, because the joke gets old. Boots drink dubbin like thirsty men and still need the cobbler's hand twice a year. Soles pegged and stitched until they look like a map of stubbornness. You stitch wrist wraps from old apron corners and tie them with twine, guarding the soft place lime, loves. Gloves are for show or frost. Bare hands know the truth of a blade. You oil the knife and hang it up as if it could sleep. One day the yard rehearses every bad story at once, a sling rope phrase where it rides the post and sighs instead of snapping, which is somehow worse. You spot it, shout, and 3 men take strain while you throw on a fresh splice with beeswax and a curse that lands soft. 10 minutes later, a beam knife kisses a thumb that moved proud, and vinegar finds the cut with its smart speech. Cuff slips on lanolin and sits instead of falling, which earns him a biscuit and a lecture. Near dusk, the lime pit throws a fat bubble against the rim. A splash reaches a man's forearm and writes its name in white. You walk him to the vinegar bucket, rinse without hurry, wrap with rag, and keep talking about the price of coal so his breath remembers to stay. He laughs once, it counts as a win. The yard keeps breathing. So do you. Bathing is a plan, not an event. You choose late evening when the court quiets, heat a kettle, and tip it into a basin with vinegar, until your eyes admit it's working. Shirt off, sleeves rolled, you wash in fields, wrists and forearms first, the lime country, then neck, ears, and the border where cap meets hair. Lye soap nips, then bargains. You rinse fast so it doesn't win. A clean rag becomes grey in minutes, proof rather than surprise. For the back you brace against the door jamb and work a cloth on a stick like a soldier drilling. Feet soak last, ankles humming from cold floors that believe in theft. Tallow into the knuckles, neat's foot onto the boots. Rag hung near the stove to dry into a board by morning. You sniff your sleeve, test the air, and decide you smell like a man who tried very hard, which is sometimes enough. Sleep is a negotiation with small lives. You beat the straw tick outside, watch pepper grains scurry, then dust cloves through your fingers like a spice merchant with enemies. The blanket carries other men's stories. You brush it with a stiff broom until your shoulder complains. Before bed, you run a fine comb through hair dipped in vinegar water and wince at what the teeth bring up. Candle out. Street noise folds itself into thirds. Horses, a late quarrel, barrel or hoops. You sleep on your side to keep the hand cracks from arguing with the sheet. Sometime near midnight the itch testifies anyway. You light, lift the seam, pinch, and send a flea to the stove with a sentence and no appeal. The room cools, you settle, and the straw whispers like a cautious friend. You thank it for not being stone. Hands are a ledger you balance twice a day. Morning inspection under the window. New cuts, old scabs, the thin white lines that mean lime licked and remembered. Vinegar rinse, tallow rub, strip of linen around the worst, then the twine wrap at the wrist where the pit waits. Cuff shows you a split he calls a mouth. You teach him to shut it with beeswax and thread, then keep it quiet with a smear of lard and a promise to wear the rag. Daylight swears by tobacco juice and produces a plug the colour of trouble. You accept the advice, not the cure. A peddler sells salve that smells like mint and hope. You buy a thumb's worth and feel noble for a day. The knife handle gets a lick of wax, the beam a scrape of pumice, and you vow, again, not to test an edge with skin. Vows help, but steel remembers. Work flows in bells and weights. First bell finds you at soak pits. Wood bar under palms, shoulders drawing the water slow so the hides agree. Second bell is beam house. Knife, scud, rinse, and the long ordinary silence of men who know the stroke. Dinner bell means onion, bread, and a swallow of porter if the jug kept its promise. You chew leaning because sitting teaches the back bad lessons. Afternoon climbs to bark pits and the windlass. A measured prayer of turns and pulls, wood answering in a language you finally speak. The foreman does his rounds with a book that lies less than most. You report in scratches on posts and knots in rope. Toward dusk, the yard learns to close. Knives wiped, beams sluiced, pits stirred for the night, ropes coiled like obedient serpents. Last bell is permission, not a gift. You take it anyway. Saturday, half-day has its rituals. You line your boots on the sill and shave with a dull razor that behaves better if you whisper to it. A needle and coarse thread turn a torn cuff into something a buyer won't notice at 20 paces. At the leather market, you loiter at the edge and listen to men weigh hides with thumbs, then carry news home like bread. If coin permits, you buy a paper cone of whelks and chew brine until your tongue forgets bark. You stop at the cobbler who taps your sole nails down so they stop winking at puddles. A letter waits from a sister in Deptford, baby thriving, rent sulking, husband sober this week. And you read it twice because ink is dear. In the afternoon you mend the chair that croaks under you and sweep the room with a vigour that pretends to be hope. It almost convinces. Night returns with smaller plans. You boil a little tea in the dented kettle, pour 2 cups, one for you, one cooling by habit in case someone knocks, and sit with the window latched against a breeze that knows your cracks. You oil the knife and lay it cloth-wrapped on the shelf like a sleeping animal. You write your name on a slate near the door because the chalk makes it look official. The city mutters through the bricks. Ropewalk creak. Distant watchman's call. A laugh that didn't mean harm. You press your hands together, feel the sing fade to a warm ache, and count your breaths until the numbers lose interest. Tomorrow will be pits again, bark again, small coins and bigger weights. You bank the stove, blow the candle, and let the dark do what it's good at, quieting everything it can reach. The rest quiets eventually. Bark arrives by barge at first light, wet sacks stacked like bricks of rain. The grinder wakes with a slow cough, iron teeth chewing oak into something the pits can drink. You and 2 men carry it in baskets, shoulders flinching from the tannin dust that sticks to sweat and makes tea of your skin. The miller minds the hopper with a stick, keeps stones from sulking, and curses gently when the belt thinks about wandering. Sumac comes later for the fancy lots, green-brown and soft as old bread. It smells like cupboard leaves. You store bark in a dry loft above the beam house, floorboards sifted with crumbs of last year's harvest. A boy treads the pile to settle it. You warn him about splinters that never heal right. Downstairs, a man mends slats over the pits so feet remember where not to go. By 7, the whole yard hums the same tune. Carts creak, winch sings, liquor slaps posts in polite, steady waves. Work starts before the clock tells the truth because rot respects no schedule. Hides talk if you listen from the grain up. Belly stretches and lies, shoulder keeps promises, back wears scars earned at pasture. You lay a hide on the beam with the neck to your left, blade angled low. Hands set so the push stays steady across that sneaky belly. Cuff watches your wrists, not the knife, which is right. Knives follow hands more than minds. You show him to test with a finger pad, not a thumb tip, and only after the blade is sure of itself. The scud wants short strokes and patience. The fleshing knife wants courage married to caution. You keep a bucket at heel height for sweepings and set your boots wide, so the beam cannot bargain with your balance. When the grain shows clean as wet slate, you rinse, lift and turn the hide, keeping the neck out of trouble. Cuff tries a pass and earns a nick for pride. You make him wrap it and start again while the lesson is warm. Inspectors arrive in coats that were white before the lane had a vote. They carry sticks with brass ends, sniff like apprentices, and ask about drains as if drains have biographies. The foreman leads them past the pits you stirred at dawn. Voice polite as rope burn. One writes effluent, as though the word could clean itself. You open the sluice so clear water chases brown, and the men approve the motion like judges at a parade. They advise fresh lime wash on low walls and a new trap on the ditch that sulks toward the dock. By evening you've painted everything that can't run away and hammered the trap in place with wedges that promise to behave. The yard smells the same, but it looks like it tried, which passes for progress when progress has no nose. They mention the Board of Health and fines that prefer your purse to your ears. You nod, answer evenly, and wipe your shoes on the step because chalk makes everything look truer than it is. Neighbours forgive as long as coin keeps crossing streets. The baker sells you yesterday's loaf and today's gossip. The farrier sharpens your awl because your apron keeps his fire in bread. A woman who takes in washing says the steam from your loft coats her sheets. You buy her a £1/4 of soap and carry her bucket 2 flights. Children shout, "Tanner," without malice and hold their breath for sport. On market days, the leather market sings, slaps and argues like church with knives put away. Old men talk gill days when free men wore aprons like banners and fines kept bad leather honest. You hear the pride and the grief. Now buyers want price before virtue, and virtue learns to haggle. You nod, because you still have to eat when memories have finished their speech. Your landlord replaces a rotten gutter after 3 visits, not from kindness, but because buyers complained about drips on their hats. A cut goes wrong for a man named Pryor. Not deep, but dirty from beam slop and bark grit, a sly wound that waits. By evening the line climbs from knuckle to elbow like a red wick. You and Daylight walk him to the surgery above the Chandler, a room of bottles, pewter, and a table that tells its own history. The surgeon lances, drains and poultices with bread and sugar. Pryor swears like a hymn and then sits quiet as rain. You bring him broth the next night and his wife thanks you with a look that weighs more than coin. 2 days later he's back, paler, slower, careful with the beam as if it might remember. He works short and goes home early, which is a mercy bought with fear. You show Cuff the scar as a map he ought not to travel. Bread and sugar draw poison, he says. Sometimes you run from the air. A cheap seat at a music hall buys you 2 hours of other people's noise. Comic songs, a dancer who spins till the gaslights blink, a juggler keeping 3 knives honest. You laugh once, clap twice, and let your hands rest in your lap where nothing needs lifting. The smell follows, but minds its manners among beer, smoke, and human plans. A man sells hot chestnuts in a paper twist outside. You burn your fingers and call it warmth. On the walk home you take the long way along the river. Masts make a black forest against the moon, and ropes creak like patient animals. Across St. Saviour's dock the water wears a skin of light. You stop, breathe through your mouth, and feel the night cool your wrists. Back in your room, you bank the fire, set boots by the grate, and lay your knife where the morning can find it. Sleep collects you without ceremony, like a porter lifting a sack. Curriers speak leather the way millers speak grain. After drying, they take your lots and turn them from brown truth into finished promise. You watch a man work a slicker, glass set in wood, pressing strokes that heat the grain until it lies. Another runs the jack, twin rollers that chew slowly, then feed to a staking frame where a blunt blade thumps the hide to temper it. Stuffing mixes neat's foot with tallow and a whisper of wax. The blend goes in with heel and palm, then boards score a faint crosshatch so the surface breaks right when bent. A dogwood stick edges seams. A moon knife kisses corners square. For fancy trade they glaze with an agate that makes light behave. For harness they leave body, not shine. Sumac lots keep a quiet yellow. Bark-only lots settle deeper, like tea forgotten by the hearth. You lift a piece, flex it, listen for spring. Leather answers honestly. You try to learn to do the same. Your sister comes from Deptford with a boy who will not be small forever. She brings a loaf, 2 apples, and a look that says the stair smelled you before she did. You boil tea, add a spoon of sugar you plan to stretch a week, and pretend the room minds its corners. The boy rats through your things and finds the wrist wraps. He tries one on and calls himself a knight. You rinse at a basin, scrub the table, and set out a heel of cheese like a feast. She asks if work might change soon. You say leather feeds as straight as any trade that eats hands first. She nods, looks at your cracks, and presses a tin of salve into your palm with a face that forbids argument. On the walk back, you carry her bucket half the way, and she tells you not to worry the boy with talk of pits. You promise. Then teach him to keep his feet from edges without admitting why. Rain remembers old paths and insists on them. A storm comes in sideways, drumming the roofs, and the yard goes from damp to river in an hour. The sluice backs up. Bark liquor climbs boards. A sling of hides rides high on the dark water like a raft with pinions. The foreman shouts for stop planks and sand, and men move like they've rehearsed, because you have. The river drills you more often than the board. You drive wedges where the ditch sulks, throw sacks at the worst run, and rig a halter line across the lane so carts can pull without dying. Cuff learns to walk the brace pole with his knees, not his pride. By evening the pit sits sullen but contained, and the liquor has weakened only enough to ask for another week. You mark posts with new scratches, and the foreman's face softens half a thumb's width. Rain quits at dusk like a man told the ale ran out. Night turns the yard into a study. Lamps burn low, shadows learn to speak slower, and the windlass reports each tooth like a clerk. You draw a sling under supervision because dark finds fools fast. Sound carries different. A rat's feet, the soft slap of liquor against a post, the hard laugh of men pretending they're not cold. The glue men's boil house throws a steady breath you borrow with your hands. A constable pauses at the gate and decides his beat lies elsewhere. You check knots twice, then again, and this is the rope answers without tricks. At midnight you coil lines with a neatness you don't spend on talk, and you love the way an obedient loop looks under lamplight. The city beyond the wall sleeps, with one eye open. Barges shift, bells lie to each other. You step out at change, and the stars look like nails holding a black roof. You think they'll hold. Talk at the alehouse wanders from wages to pride. Old Cope swears the guild days meant something. Bad leather fined, good leather praised. Apprentices bound by rule and not by hunger. Younger men shrug and point to buyers who care for price and weight before honesty. A rope walk fellow says he can smell cheap oak from a street away. You tell him you can smell cheap everything. A woman with arms like rope herself paws and suggests you all take your arguments home before they grow legs. On the walk back, Daylight asks if you'd ever try white leather with alum. You say that's Tor's heaven and hell both. You like bark because it doesn't lie about what it costs. Cuff listens and files the words somewhere near his wrist bones. You hope that's a safe place. Outside the dock, a lighterman hums something that might be a hymn or a warning. You don't ask which. Health collects small taxes daily and a large one when you forget. Bark dust roughens the throat, so you gargle warm water salted like cheap tears. Lime dries the lips. You keep a bit of tallow in a twist of paper and use it like law. Winter breeds chilblains. You knit rag strips into a ritual for toes and pretend skill. Old Cope shows you the hand with 2 fingertips that never came back from a bad pull. He taps the stubs against the table like punctuation. You look at Cuff's hands when he laughs and feel a hard thought move through your chest. So you buy a tin, cheap, bitter, probably half chalk, and tell the boy it helps. You teach him the vinegar bucket is never to be more than 1 step away, and you move it yourself so the rule stays true. At night, you count your coins, fold them in a sock, and hide them where rent won't look first. You sleep after that the way a watchman naps between rounds. White liquor does not arrive as magic. You make it like a mason with worse manners. Quicklime comes in casks that sweat when the rain forgets itself. You pry the lid with an iron, tip pale stones into a slaking tub, and feed water in small truths while the lime wakes hot enough to hiss. Steam climbs. You lean back so your eyebrows keep their job. The mix froths, settles, and turns creamy. A biting milk that will later tell hair to leave and skin to mind its place. You strain grit through a willow basket, then cut the liquor with clean water until the paddle reads a weight your wrist trusts. You chalk the date on the post and keep the lad out of the steam, because lime loves lungs more than sense. When a lump pops, you step aside so that your splash chooses floor, not wrist. You cover the cask, rinse your hands in sour water, and thank vinegar for being rude in the right direction. Mistakes cost more than coin. A hide tears at the beam because someone scudded fast and left roots bragging. The rip starts at the flank like a shy whisper, and runs brave when your knife finds it. You stop, breathe, and lay both palms on the grain, as if hands could knit. They cannot. The foreman walks over, looks, and says nothing for a minute that teaches you humility. He has you trim the wound to a clean line with the half moon, square the edge, and mark the lot for lower trade. Book, not boot. Your stomach calls you names, but your face stays even. Cuff stands 2 paces back, eyes wide, learning that leather remembers every proud motion. You show him the belly stretch that lies, the shoulder truth that holds, and the way to angle the push so the blade rides, not bites. Loss stings, then settles. You sweep the scrap into the trough for glue, and promise the beam you'll listen better. Food after a ruined hour tastes like forgiveness. The pie man under the arch whistles you in and cuts eel in brown gravy, ladled into corned crust that has learned to be brave. Pepper, vinegar, and a pinch of mimistry turn river into meal. You eat standing, back against cold brick, spoon-tapping tin with a sound that could almost be Sunday. A woman sells pickled whelks from a jar that has seen more stories than coin. You buy 3 and let brine clear the lime lip. Bread follows, torn with her hands you clean twice and still don't trust. Steam sits in the arch like a ceiling you can afford. The pie man asks after the yard without malice. You answer in distances and waits, not in smells. He nods, adds a wedge you didn't pay for, and tells you to keep your wrists out of trouble. You promise, mouth full, and leave a coin that hurts a little. Hurt means you'll remember to be careful. A buyer comes whispering Russia leather, though he means the London imitation. Birch tar worked into good bark-tanned hide, until the smell walks ahead like a small parade. The courier warms the oil in a pot that never leaves his bench. You watch black shine bloom under the slicker and feel an envy you won't admit. The buyer presses, bends, and listens for the dry song good leather sings. He wants trunks that won't mind a voyage and straps that think rain is theatre. You talk thickness, spring, and where the bark was strong, then let the foreman do the haggling you'd only bruise. When the man asks about rot, you show him the loft, the laths, the windows cracked to a line, and the frames tied honest. He nods, writes a number, and the foreman's mouth almost smiles. You carry the stack to the cart and breathe birch smoke all the way back down the stairs. Lofts breed small wars when damp gets clever. A leak maps itself across a beam and drips onto a hang, where a week's work waits to go right. You rig pans, shift laths, and tie the hide with new cords so the water finds floor, not grain. To fen mould, you smoke the room with sulphur in a pan of sand. Yellow fire blooms low and sulks blue, throwing a taste like burnt match into the rails. Windows open a hand, you watch the breath, roll along the roof like a slow animal. The smoke drifts, the damp retreats, and you paint fresh lime wash over the stain so it forgets its name. Downstairs, you rub Neat's foot into a lot that waited too long, and coax spring back with patience and boards. Cuff coughs, learns to keep to leeward and writes "Smoke Day" on the post in letters that will wash away by Friday. At home, a letter waits, edges softened by pockets and weather. A friend from last summer writes of cholera that came quick and left slower, naming streets like a sideways toll. The pump at the corner is shut and the board painted it black, a warning you can read without schooling. You sit, kettle ticking, and read twice because the first time the words were only noise. The second time they become rooms and faces. You boil water longer than habit, rinse the cup again, and set the pail where the neighbour's cat cannot drink. On the sill, your wrist cracks look like a map drawn by a tired child. You grease them, fold the letter, and stand a moment by the window. The lane smells of rain, horse, and the faint ghost of birch. You breathe through your nose anyway, and tell the room you will keep living slow. Straps start as long promises. You pick a back with honest grain, lay it belly out on the bench, and square one end with the half moon until the edge looks like it means it. The plough gauge rides the leather like a ship's bow, fence set to width, blade set to behave. You draw slow, steady, feeling the cut chatter. When it meets a vein you should have avoided. The strap falls away in a clean ribbon. You heat a creasing iron in the stove's mouth. Run parallel lines down the edge to teach it manners, then bevel the corner with a French edger so it won't bite a coat. A pricking wheel walks a neat row of dots. The awl follows, punching holes that ask for thread. 2 needles, 1 wax thread, and the saddle stitch you learned from a man who didn't smile. Edges burnish under a bone until they shine like patience. Buckles wait in a tray, brass winking like it knows something you don't. Foreign hides arrive with salt stories on them. The clerk writes river plate in his book, and you run a palm across a flank that travelled more water than most men. Weight is good, belly stretches more than homestock. The shoulder's scar pattern looks like a map of somewhere the buyer will pretend to know. Salt burns in channels where packing failed. You cut those into straps for cheaper trade, or into pieces for books that don't mind scars. Cuff asks if far leather smells different. You tell him distance only teaches new ways to rot. The soaks need longer, the lime shorter. You keep a slate for foreign lots so the yard doesn't forget their temper. A buyer comes sniffing adventure and leaves with numbers, because romance is dearer than boots. Cuff's lesson comes on an ordinary turn. He leans into a beamstroke, proud of the grain he's shown, and his boot slides on a whisper of lanolin the last man forgot. You grab the back of his apron, weight backward, and the beam kisses only air. He laughs too quickly. You don't. You scrape the floor where the grease hid and show him how to work a step. Heel planted, toe light, knees soft, blade wrist low. You chalk a square on the plank where men stand, a habit stolen from rope walk fellows who measure with feet before ends. The vinegar bucket shifts closer. The wrist strap tightens another turn. You make him fetch the rag and clean the beam himself until pride learns soap. He thanks you with a face that might remember. You pretend you didn't notice. You visit your sister with a strap and a buckle wrapped in sacking like a secret. The boy opens the door and announces you as if you were the coalman. You accept the rank. At the table you punch tongue holes by guess and then by sight, nip a keeper from scrap, and stitch with slow bites so he can watch the thread cross like soldiers changing sides. Brass meets leather. You set the rivet with a few careful taps that make the table ring. The boy belts it twice, 3 times, then around a coat he will grow into, then around the dog until the dog decides dignity is worth a growl. Your sister sets tea and a heel of pie and says you smell less like yesterday, which counts. You wash cups. She insists she'll do it. You win because your hands are already wet. On the walk back, you carry her pail and talk of nothing heavy. The court learns a new cough. A woman down the stairs takes to bed, and the board paints the pump mouth black again, as if colour can forbid thirst. You boil longer, drink weaker tea, and watch men sniff their cups like inspectors. The yard responds by moving the drinking barrel farther from the drains and posting a boy whose job it is to shout when men forget. You bring vinegar home in a stone jar and set it by the basin like a guard. Daylight says his cousin swears camphor on a string keeps sickness shy. You tie one for luck and call it science once. Cuff's mother sends a charm stitched into a rag. You pin it under your shirt and don't tell anyone, because bravery is loud and caution should whisper. At night you count the street's footsteps and bless each one that doesn't stop at your door. Dock nights give you a different air for a while. You walk past rope, tar, lamp oil and wet hemp, a trinity that nearly cleans the nose. Barges shift against stone with small honest complaints. A night watchman tips his hat from under a cape that deserves its romance. You nod because words bruise quiet. Across the water, a warehouse door stands open like a mouth considering speech. You listen, and hear only the creak of a pulley that never sleeps. You lean on a bollard, let a little cold live in your wrists, and imagine waking one day without the yard shirt on your bones. Then a gust brings a thin familiar thread, the bark's tea, the lime's egg, the bate's churchyard, and you smile because denial wastes effort. You walk home through streets that have decided you belong. You decide the same for now. You carry a finished side to a cordwainer off Bermondsey Street, a room bright with glass and pricked with awls. He greets the leather first, palms it like a baker checking dough, then nods as if you passed an exam nobody wrote. He lays your lot across his bench, cuts vamp and quarter with a clicking knife and sets pegs in a dish like seeds. You watch him stitch a welt with boar bristle threaded through a waxed end, the thread singing a dry little song in each hole. A boy at his elbow taps heel lifts true, peg by peg, and grins when the stack stands square. The cordwainer talks soles and uppers, asks where the bark was strong, and you point without boasting to the backs you chose. He pays honest, not kind, and throws in offcuts you can trade for twine. On the walk back, you smell birch tar somewhere and smile at the thought of trunks bound for oceans you won't meet. You pass a harness maker scraping a strap on a round beam. Brass rings in a tray like coins. Your leather will cross a horse and then a country. Back at the yard, the sulphur pan misbehaves. A blue tongue climbs higher than it should. You pull the tray to the door with a hook, cough once, and tame the flame with a handful of damp sand. Cuff keeps to leeward like you taught. He holds the window rope ready, eyes smarting, mouth a firm line. The tiled drain gulps, sulks, then remembers its job. A man jokes that the devil loves yellow fire. You answer he can have it after we're done. When the smoke thins, the loft breathes cleaner. You walk the frames, tying cords where knots forgot, testing laths with a knuckle. Downstairs, the bait pit asks for stirring. You shoulder the pole and work slow circles until the scum breaks and folds under, patient as laundry. Pure lumps soften into brown milk. You keep your lips shut and your eyes half closed. A splash freckles the apron and stops there. You thank the leather like a partner who took the blow. By noon the windows sweat less, the hides lie calmer, and the yard pretends for a blink to be reasonable. The week turns toward buyers again. You chalk widths on butt ends, stack by thickness, and dress edges with a bone until pride sits down. The foreman checks by thumb and ledger. You read the figures over his shoulder and make your sums in silence so he won't notice you can. Porters snake slings through the stack, the windlass grumbling like a cousin who owes you coin, and the load rides steady into daylight. A man in a hat with ambitions presses his stick into the grain, bends a corner and pretends he can hear the tree. He asks about time in ooze, about windows in the loft, about bark strength, and you answer with weights, weeks, and weather. He nods like a priest, then tries price like a picklock. The foreman smiles with only half a mouth and clicks him higher. Cuff stands near the tailboard, learning where to look and when to keep his mouth a pocket. When the cart leaves, the yard exhales. You coil ropes, wipe the chalk from your fingers, and allow yourself a thin, private satisfaction. At night you teach yourself letters beyond ledgers. A candle, a chapbook, and a pencil shaved to a spear become your school. You copy words from a billhead: oak, bark, liquor, charge, until the shapes stop kicking. Cuff watches, lid heavy, then asks if a man can read his way out of a pit. You say a man can read his way around one, and that's already worth tea. You practice numbers you pretend you never learned. Yards, pounds, weeks to tan, shillings to rent. You stack them neat until worry loses interest. The room keeps your breath near your face, and the stove murmurs like a patient dog. On the sill sits the tin of salve your sister gave. You touch the lid like a promise. You sharpen the pencil again, write your name twice, and take a stubborn pleasure in seeing it hold the line. Outside, a cart passes, iron rings complaining. Inside, your hands rest briefly, like tools return to their hooks. Saturday rain slicks the market stones and gives the leather market a shine it didn't ask for. You trade for a stout needle, a yard of coarse linen, and a handkerchief that used to be white. The woman calls it handsome, and you let her. Old coat bargains for hobnails like he's buying land. Finger on each nail as if counting sins. In a doorway, a charity school files past. Blue coats darken to ink, small faces tilted up at weather that doesn't care. You step aside and count without thinking, making sure the last boy earns the same space as the first. A coster yells bruised oranges, a knife grinder sings his wheel awake, a sailor argues with a map that lies. You smell tar, yeast, and a drifting note of bark from your own coat and decide to forgive it for today. On the way back you stop at the cobbler. He tightens pegs that blinked loose in the wet and refuses coin with a shrug that says you've already paid in smell. Age walks with you whether you greet it or not. Old Cope's hands tremble before the first bell now. He warms them at the glue men's door and pretends he came for stories. Your own fingers wake slower, stiffness like a guest that overstays. You stretch before the beam as if prayer had bones, wrists wrapped, knees soft, weight honest. Memory helps, the safe stance, the low wrist, the habit of checking knots you tied yourself. Cuff lifts with his legs like you insisted. You see your past in him, and your future in Cope, and feel, briefly, like a bridge that won't quite reach both banks. In the afternoon you measure straps with a rule you trust, burnish edges with bone until the shine answers back, and oil cracks that argue with reason. At dusk you carry vinegar to the bench, rinse slow, and watch the day's chalk lines blur, which feels kinder than forgetting. You bank the stove, rub Neat's foot into boots, and tell your hands aloud that they did enough to earn sleep. Morning brings the head count you give your own hands. You hold them to the window's grey, flex, listen to the skins, speak in tight whispers, then wrap wrists in linen that learned your shape. At the yard, the foreman sets his thumb on the post and nods toward the soaks. You answer with the bar, wood warm from other palms. Hides roll under, rise, shed their brine, and drink again. You mark the nail scratches you made 3 days ago, and trust the schedule more than any clock. The lime pits look calm until you stir. A white skin breaks and folds like sullen lace. You lower a lot on stone weights and feel the rope talk in your hand. The hissing climbs your sleeves and stops at the apron's edge. A quiet bargain you never forget to respect. Cuff brings the chalk and you note which post will fetch you at noon. When the bell mumbles, you pocket onion, wipe your blade, and remind your feet where the floor lies honest. The day answers with work, and you answer it back without speeches. The glue men boil everything the yard refuses to mourn. Scraps from the beam trough, sinew thin as thread, hoof pairings, and the odd rib from a knacker's cart all go into a copper that sweats resin tears. You stand at the door to borrow steam that feels almost clean from a distance. A skimmer drags a brass dish across the top and lifts gelatin lace that shivers like a held breath. They dry sheets on frames, translucent as onions, then break them into amber flakes for cabinet makers who pretend not to know where the smell began. A boy salts the dregs for the bone black man, who will sell powder to printers and sugar refiners without blinking. The foreman trades your troffings for a favour on cart day. The scale obliges with a number you can live with. You wipe your mouth with the back of a hand that still remembers lime, and step into air that decides not to be kinder. Soapmen buy your fat and teach it manners with lye. Their yard is a parliament of kettles, paddles knocking cents into melted tallow, while ash liquor bites first polite, then rude. You bring a bucket that sloshes like confession and leave with shavings wrapped in paper that sweats through. Chandlers nearby stir dips for candles that gutter honest in rooms like yours. You swap a scoop of dubbin you mixed yourself, tallow, neatsfoot, a whisper of wax, for a coil of wick and a promise of light that won't argue with draughts. The soapman jokes that your apron could season a stew. You suggest his kettle could clean a conscience. He laughs, wipes his brow and throws in a twist of soft soap for your Sunday basin. Back outside, the lane smells of yeast, smoke and your own bark, and you accept that the city will always taste like a committee. Market day sharpens people. Buyers step with sticks and broidered chains, measuring hides like tailors with fewer compliments. You and daylight square butt ends, chalk widths, and stack by temper, so a man can't pretend the wrong piece belongs to his price. One buyer pinches the grain until it blushes, declares the bark weak, and offers a number meant for a funeral. The foreman smiles with half a mouth and asks Skugcum to bend again near the shoulder. The spring answers, and the number improves as if by weather. You trim bellies with the half moon, sweep scud spills no one should see, and tie slings clean so the windlass can lift without teaching lessons. When the cart creaks away, the market breathes out. You count knots with your eyes and scrub chalk from your fingers. Pride stands nearby, but you let it wait outside. The buyer returns once, watches you tap the grain with a bone, hears the dry, even note, and lifts his price the way a man adjusts his hat to fit truth. You walk the Surrey Canal one Sunday, because moving your legs without a bar between them feels like a borrowed future. Water shuffles under willows, barges doze, a boy throws crust to a goose that pretends royalty. You think of your father's hands, a different trade, the same cracks. He taught you to test rope with your ear, to hear strain before it speaks. You wonder if you would call this work good or merely honest. The girl with a basket pinches her nose, then smiles anyway. You tip your cap and let the joke pass. Along the towpath, a man mends a net with fingers like wires. He glances at your apron and nods, one labourer to another. Clouds gather like meetings that could have been letters. You turn for home before rain decides your plans for you. A woman by the bridge sells winkles with 2 pins and vinegar. You buy a penny's worth and let brine clean your mouth. Past the lock, 2 lads skips. Stones. 5 rings travel outward. Neater stitches. Night watch shifts invent their own time. You sit the gate with a lantern that smokes. Iron hook across your knees, listening for feet that mean trouble. Dogs nose the rail and accept your authority because you smell like pits and decisions. Somewhere beyond, a shutter bangs, then thinks better. You make a round with keys that admit you to every dark the yard owns. Loft, beam house, bark room, the quiet brim of lime where even rats choose courtesy. You tap ropes, check knots, and test the windlass pole with a thumb the way a priest tests a latch. At the far wall, the river makes a sound like a tired man standing. You breathe, count to 50, and let the lantern draw a small circle you can keep. Dawn finds you with soot on your cuff and the yard unhurt. You call that victory and mean it. Once you catch a boy halfway through the rail, pockets interested in brass, you send him home with his ears ringing, and the lesson to count boards, not coins. Dawn finds you at the yard gate before the foreman's bell remembers its duty. The lane keeps its breath, cool and damp, Your palm knows the latch by splinters you could name. Tools wait where you left them. Beam knife wiped thin and oiled and scudder, broad and stubborn. Moon blade sleeping in its sack. You unwrap, test the edges with a thumbnail's side, and polish the handles with a thumb until wood answers warm. A new coil of hemp sits on the post like a tame snake. You splice an eye, lay in the tucks, and rub beeswax along the lay so the strands choose peace. You check the windlass pole with one slow push and listen for the tooth to click true. Before the bell you walk the pit edges, tap lathes with a knuckle, and chalk a small cross where a nail sulked yesterday. Vinegar waits in a stone jar by the beam. You wet a rag, tie your wrists, and tell your hands gently to remember what hurt them last week. The day widens into errands that pay in quiet. A widow over in Page's Walk keeps a chair that limps. You carry a strap, 2 tacks, and time. Her room smells of tea leaves saved twice, soap, and a grief that learned to fold itself small. You plane the rung's edge with your pocket knife, bind the joint with leather, and set the tacks like punctuation. She calls you Tanner as if it were a title rather than a tax, pours water over leaves that give what they can, and talks about the year her husband laughed at rain. While the glue men's steam wanders in under the sash, you fit the seat, test it with a careful weight, and hear the legs answer without complaint. She presses a slice of bread into your hand and insists. You eat it there so she can watch somebody finish something. On the steps you rub a thumb of dubbin into your cracked knuckles and thank the chair for standing, because some things still do when asked. Back at the yard, the river sulks in its banks and gives you a half day by threatening more. Foreman calls it prudence, which men hear as mercy. You use the hours like a careful cook. Knives to stone, slow circles until the edge hums, straps measured and cut for Monday's orders, ropes combed and dressed where grit started arguments. Cufflin's a new knot, bowling on a bite, and ties it until his fingers stop thinking and do. You show him how a splice reads when it's wrong, how there are lay gaps, and how a right one sits quiet without boasting. He asks why you never hurry edges. You answer that leather memorises pride, then charges interest. At the pits you skim a scum that thought it owned the hour. Sprinkle fresh bark where the liquor flagged, and write the date in chalk large enough for tired eyes. You oil the windlass shaft, count the teeth aloud, and leave a rag tucked under the pole for morning. By the bell you have 3 coils neat as sermons, a bench swept, and a knife that waits like a good dog. Evening invites a small remembering. You sit at the table with the chapbook open to a page of words you can nearly hold without looking. River, bark, leather, rent. Your father's hands visit in the way you lay the pencil down between lines, never across. He taught rope by sound, and you catch yourself leaning an ear to a chord as if it might sing back. You write your nephew's name twice, slow, then sketch the half-moon knife so he will know a shape before he knows a trade. The stove gives a steady thrum, the kettle clicks when it forgets to boil, the window leaks a thread of night that smells of yeast and rain. You copy a notice from the leather market, weights, prices, terms, and circle a word you plan to ask about. When the pencil snaps, you sharpen it with 2 patient cuts and keep the shavings in a saucer, because waste should always answer to someone. Supper is soup made from yesterday's bones, onion, and a guess. The pot speaks in small bubbles. You stir with the clean end of a stick and salt as if forgiving. Bread softens against the broth and remembers wheat. Daylight knocks once, shrugs off damp, and sits with the caution of a man who has owned too many chairs. He brings news, a lighter stuck upriver, a cooper short on oak, a rumour that a bored man fainted at a glue yard and woke offended. You pour tea into the chipped cup you keep for company, and push the better slice of bread across. He asks about Cuff, and you say the boy listens, which is rarer than speed. Steam beads on the window and writes brief ghosts with your breath. When the pot drops to a hush, you fish out a rib for the dog downstairs and call that charity paid in stew. Night stretches, work quieted, and you give your boots their due. Dubbin from the tin, doled with a scrap of flannel until the seams remember kindness. Pegs tapped flat. laces checked where they fret against the eyelets. You set them side by side like brothers who finally agree. Wrist wraps hung on a nail, knife laid to sleep on its folded cloth. You open the window a hand to let the lane's cooler breath argue with your own. A cart passes with a wheel that wants a wedge. You hear it from the bed and think of oak. Somewhere a watchman calls the hour like a man counting proofs. You blow the candle, wait for the dark to settle, and breathe through your nose until bark fades and sleep finds the spare room in your chest. In the quiet, you promise tomorrow's hands they may stop early if they behave. They rarely do, but a promise is a soft pillow. Morning brings hides from a knacker who swears he hurried, which only means the stink has a head start. You and Daylight cut the ropes, lever the stiff rolls onto the skid, and feel the salt crust rasp your palms. One flank shows slip, hair, already letting go without your lime's permission. So you sort it to the quick soak and mark the post with a chalk X that warns against pride. Belly scars like river maps tell you which strokes will lie later. Shoulder keeps its promises if you don't bully it. You rinse the cartboards with 2 buckets to keep flies from arguing with your breakfast, then tip the first hide into the cold, letting the weight slide from your bar without teaching you a lesson. The liquor clouds to a colour you never asked to name. You note the hour with your nail, pat the rope with the back of your hand, and work the second hide under until bubbles stop pretending there are air. By the time the foreman's bell coughs itself awake, the soak has remembered its job and the yard has remembered yours. A man from the commissioners arrives with boots too clean for this street and a notebook that thinks it's a judge. He points his stick at the ditch, asks where overflow goes when the river climbs, and you show him the stop planks you cut and the sand you keep bagged under the stairs. He talks traps, grates, and a scheme of pipes that might one day tell water to mind its manners. The foreman says he loves rules most once they explain how to keep working. You lift the sluice and let clean water chase brown long enough to make a point without robbing the pits. He nods, writes improved, and recommends lime wash on the lower brick where splashes brag. You promise, then mean it, because lime wash keeps bricks honest and inspectors farther away. When he leaves, his footprints look like coins stamped into muck. The river licks them flat before noon. The smell stays, a taxpayer that never misses a week. After dinner you sit cuff at the bench with an awl-pricking wheel and a strap cut true, teaching the cross-stitch his fingers will curse and later trust. Holes walk in a straight line because the wheel keeps its own pride. The awl follows, twisted slow so the slit remembers to close on thread. Waxed linen hums through, needle to needle, your thumbs setting each bite down neat as cobbles after rain. You show him to bevel the edge so coats don't fray, to burnish with bone until the shine answers back, and to crease with a warm iron so the lines look like they belong. He pricks too deep, then too shy, then finds the middle where leather forgives. You talk about grain that lies, belly that cheats, shoulder that holds, and the way a strap tells a story if you listen with your hands. When he ties off and rubs tallow lightly into the edge, the surface glows like wet slate. He smiles once and pretends it wasn't for you. Toward afternoon, a cartwheel drops a spoke in the lane, and the whole thing sits down like a tired dog, blocking the gate and half of Bermondsey with it. The carter swears poems, the horse looks embarrassed. Buyers in the market lift canes as if they plan to conduct this orchestra of trouble. You bring wedges, a jack that forgets, and a collar of rawhide soaking in a pail. Daylight fishes the fallen spoke from under the bed. You bind it tight with the wet hoop, and the farrier from 2 doors over offers his hammer without asking questions. Cuff keeps hands clear and eyes useful. The rim breathes back into round with 3 careful taps, and a prayer nobody admits to saying. You lash the hoop, set the wedges, and test the wheel with a slow turn that answers without tricks. The carter thanks the horse first, then you, then remembers to thank the farrier's hammer. The cart lurches forward, the lane remembers how to breathe. Your sister's parlour earns the evening. You read a penny sheet about ships taking tea farther than cents, and the boy counts sails in the woodcut until numbers turn to yawns. She asks if you will bring him to the river when the weather minds manners. You say yes, and add that docs teach better than sermons if someone holds his collar. Over tea, you fix a loosened hinge with a strap the width of 2 fingers, all singing small notes into wood that agrees to forgive. The boy wants a dog collar for a dog he does not yet know. You promise when the right dog appears, the collar will follow. She presses a slice of bread into your hand and a small tin of sugar as if it were medicine. You leave a wrapped strap on the mantel for her door, write your nephew's name on a scrap as practice, and pocket a letter she wants you to carry to a neighbour who reads faster. Outside, the lane tastes of yeast and rain. Back at the loft, you make a last round by lamplight, frames twitching in the draught like ribs that remember weather. You touch chords, test knots, and listen to wind talk through cracks it won last winter. The sulphur tray sleeps. Louths keep their dignity. A rat pauses, decides you outrank it, and vanishes into wood polished by generations of decisions. Downstairs, you oil the powel, wipe the beam until the grain looks like wet slate, and lay the knives in their cloth with the calm of a man arranging a tired choir. Vinegar sits by the basin like a small stern friend. You rinse your wrists and feel the day step back half a pace. Outside, water moves along the dock with a sound like breathing. You lock the gate, try it twice, and start home with your hands snug in wraps that learned your bones. Sleep rides behind your eyes like a full pail. You carry it steady and do not spill. Fog comes in from the river like wet cloth and beads on every rope. You open the yard early because damp changes temper. Lime grows secretive, bark liquor sweetens, beams turn sly. You tie your wrists slower, check the vinegar jar twice, and walk the pit edges with a pole like a blind man learning a room. Lath sweat. The windlass pole ticks softer. The ditch forgets which way it ought to run. You lower a lot on stone weights, and feel the rope drink the mist through your palms. Cuff stands 2 planks back without being told, chin down, cap tight. You stir the white liquor until the skin breaks gentle, then settle the hides in with the patience fog requires. When you pull the bar, the splash climbs only to the apron and admits defeat. You nod to nobody. The world can be tricked if you listen first and move second. A bell farther up the lane tolls for a man from the rope walk, not one of yours, but work shares borders. Men file behind the pine box, caps off, boots careful a wall on wet stones. You stand near the rear so your coat can offend fewer mourners. A preacher speaks brisk mercy. The widow holds a handkerchief like a tool. Rope walk fellows tie their grief in knots they do not name. Daylight tips 2 fingers to the cap brim and coughs the cough men know. After, you carry a plank back to the yard for use as a temporary lath because wood should keep working until it forgets how. Cuff asks if the man was old. You say old enough to have taught someone something, and that is the right age for leaving. The fog thins, the bell quits. You go back to pits because leather still asks questions. On a clear noon, your sister lets the boy visit, small hand inside hers, eyes measuring everything. You keep him behind the chalk line by the beam and teach him to count turns on the windlass without touching. 1, 2, 3. Pause, breathe. He asks if the pits are deep. You say deep enough to matter, and pass him a scrap of finished hide to mind instead. He rubs the grain with 2 thumbs and grins when the shine follows his touch. You show him the half-moon knife from a safe distance. He draws its shape in the air like a sign he can't yet spell. Your sister watches the bait pit with brave calm. You position her where the air off the door helps. Before they go, you cut a narrow strap, punch 2 holes, and stitch a small keeper while he holds the awl like a captain. He wears the loop home on his belt as if it carries a key. It carries a promise you will not say out loud. The windlass asks for your evening. A tooth miscounts and the powel sulks, so you and Daylight lay a plank, lift the housing and study wear like weather. His hands know wood as yours know hide. He chalks the gear, files a burr, and leans back to hear the click settle true. You grease the shaft with a finger's worth of tallow and a rag that remembers other fixes. Work talk loosens into old stories. A flood that put boats where pigs should be. A rope that lied and then apologised. A boy called Daylight who never answered to his given name again. He says it came from leaving early for every shift until the foreman said, "There goes Daylight," and it stuck harder than wages. You straighten, test the handle, and the pile agrees like a repaired vow. Night cools the timber. You close the housing, the gear breathes right. Quiet repairs make a man feel taller without standing. The board opens a public bathhouse off Kent Street, and even your foreman admits a trial won't kill you. You pay a penny, hang your coat, and accept a tin ticket that looks like authority. Warm water in a clean tub feels like a story other men told you wrong. You wash slow, soap stinging in familiar dialect, and watch grey rinse away without arguing to stay. A barber in the corner scrapes a jaw with calm steel. You buy his time and keep your chin steady while he chases lime lines with skill. After, you stand by a high window in a towel that has never met bark and breathe air that doesn't try to own you. Outside, the lane smells itself again. But for an hour your skin votes differently. You carry the change like a secret. Back home you launder the wrist wraps, dry them near the stove and oil the knife, which is jealous and therefore safer. Night asks smaller questions than day. You sit at the table and mend a rent in your apron with a row of stitches that don't boast. You write 3 lines from the paper: public baths and wash houses, attendance good, health improved, then copy your nephew's name until the letters stop tripping. You count coins, set aside rent, set aside coal, and leave 2 shillings folded for a book you've nearly admitted you want. Cuff knocks once, leaves you a wedge of pie and thanks for the strap lesson, and runs off before gratitude can embarrass him. You eat standing, thumb on the crust, and let quiet live with you for a while. The stove's low hum feels like a companion you can afford. You check the window, crack it a hand, and let the night polish your breath. Somewhere the river shifts and remembers the sea. You answer by banking the fire and telling your hands to rest. They try. They almost listen. Some mornings you inventory scars the way a clerk checks shelves. Left palm. Pale crescent from a beam slip in March. Right wrist. 2 white kisses where lime learned your name. You warm the hands against the kettle, tie the wraps, and step into air that files its own report. The foreman nods you toward the bark room. You rake through last week's sacks, find the damp corner and spread the crumbs on a cloth so mould doesn't rehearse. The grinder yawns, then behaves. Tannin dust writes faint tea along your knuckles. You catch yourself humming the windlass count and stop before pride hears. A ledger sits open on the bench, the foreman's numbers neat as stitched ends. You copy a column on scrap to practice sums you already know, then tuck the paper under your cap. Habit saves men. So does omitting what you still want. You stir the weak pit, teach the surface to settle, and breathe through the mouth while the air remembers to be cruel. You carry finished hides to a bookbinder off Western Street and learn a softer room. Paper stacks sleep in neat towers. A plough whispers across edges until leaves square themselves. The binder lays your leather flat, rubs the grain with a heel of bone and nods where the shine answers. He talks spines, cases, boards, and the few small mercy of hinges that don't argue. Glue here smells of horses without the river's insult. Paste dries to a thin kindness. He shows you a ledger bound last winter, your yard's bark keeping a merchant's numbers from escaping. You trace the spine with a thumb you washed twice and didn't trust once. He pays fair, not warm, and throws in a scrap for practice letters. On the way back you pass the school where boys chant sums. You count steps and keep time with them. A page holds better when the stitch ran true, so does a week. Night brings a memory with it, quiet as dust. First day at the yard, years back, apron too clean, blade too honest for your hands. Old Cope set you at the beam and spoke only 3 rules. Wrist low, feet set, vinegar near. You broke 2 before noon, and would have broken the 3rd if his cane hadn't found your shoulder light as a reminder. You bled once, learned twice, and went home with threads in your fingers you could still feel. That night the room had the same table, the same chipped basin, not quite the same man. You turn the memory over now like a strap under a burnisher, working shine from what could have stayed rough. The cane sits by Cope's door these days. He taps it on floorboards to make a point without raising his voice. You hope to reach that skill, silence that still teaches. You make a small thing because big ones rule you enough. A narrow strap becomes a keeper for your nephew's slate. You cut, crease and stitch with thread waxed thin. edges burnished on bone until the light nods. Letters come next. You scratch his initials inside, the knife barely whispering, and rub a breath of tallow so the marks grow shy. The piece sits in your palm like a coin you earned twice. You wrap it in sacking, fold it under your coat, and plan a Sunday walk before the weather changes its vote. At the basin you rinse the blade, dry it on clean rag, and oil the hinge that used to sulk. The room approves in its simple ways: kettle clicking, stove humming, window deciding not to leak. Small work steadies the hands, large work wears down. It's a lesson you repeat until it listens. Sunday finds you among stones that remember more than people do. The churchyard keeps you shade and quiet speech. Names fade where weather argued longest. You visit a square of ground that likely holds your father by a guess more than map. Records went missing, and men like him did not give the clerk enough reason to care. You say nothing out loud. Instead, you tell the week in your head. Bark sound, lime obedient, windlass honest, cuff still listening. You thank the dead for staying because staying grew you. On the walk back you buy 2 apples, 1 bruised, 1 brave, and eat the worse first to keep the better honest. The lane smells of yeast, coal, and the small clean of rain on brick. You tuck the strap gift deeper inside your coat and imagine a boy's hands learning to keep a thing safe. The thought stands you straighter than bread. A stray dog begins following you as far as the yard gate, ribs like a ladder, eyes not asking permission. It chooses the hour you sweep scud from the channels and waits where broom bristles meet stone. You toss a crust. It pretends insult, then devours the offering with an elegance poverty learns. Cuff names it soot without checking with you. The foreman pretends not to see, which is the same as blessing. You stitch a thin collar from scrap and punch a hole that hopes, then sit on the step while the dog learns your smell as something that does not hurt. It sleeps against the post at dinner, one ear awake, one eye trusting. You think of your nephew's promised dog and measure futures you're not sure you can afford. Soot rolls, sighs and snores like a kettle far away. You go back to the beam smiling once where nobody can see. Soot decides you belong to him on a morning when the river wears tin. He pads after you to Page's walk, tail swinging like a frayed rope, and sits while you mend the widow's limping chair. She calls him a gentleman and produces a heel of bread. He takes it with ceremony and a sigh that sounds like gratitude learning words. After work you bring him to your sister's steps and the boy's face performs daylight. You show how to greet a dog with a hand turned sideways, fingers quiet, patience first. Soot leans in, confirms both of you, then circles once and collapses like a bundle of old rope deciding to be a pillow. You stitch a narrow collar from scrap, punch one generous hole, and speak the promise you can keep. Food when there is some, a dry step when rain lies. The boy asks if dogs like tannery men. You say most creatures respect honest smells. Your sister hands you tea and a stern biscuit and tells you to keep your new shadow out of mischief. Training beats panic when the lime remembers teeth. Cuff leans in to tie a stone weight and a bubble's shoulders up wrong. A pale fist closing too fast. Your shout finds him. His step finds back plank. The splash kisses his cheek below the eye instead of the eye itself. You have him at the vinegar bucket in 3 heartbeats, cloth folded, rinse running, voice low and steady naming streets. Dogs, anything but fear. Daylight brings clean water. The foreman lifts the window. The yard pretends to breathe. Cuff stares ahead the way men look at sermons. You keep rinsing until the sting folds to a sulk. The skin blushes, then quiets. He nods once, swallows twice, and returns to the safe beam with a wrap you tie tighter. Later you walk him past the dock and talk about nothing useful for an hour. That is the use. He goes home carrying his pride in both hands. You walk slower, counting luck like coins. Days loosen their grip when dressing fills the bench. You slick aside until the grain lies polite, push the jack until the rollers purr, then stake along the shoulder with thumps that settle temper. The room smells of Neat's foot, warm wood, and a thin ghost of smoke from a currier's stove. Outside, a music hall warms its throat. A comic shouts practice at an empty afternoon. You listen and let the rhythm set your strokes. 2 long, 1 short. Cloth turn, burnish, heel. Soot sleeps under the bench with the feet twitching at rabbits you cannot afford. Cuff sands a moon-knife handles smooth and asks about the word finish. You say it means the part a buyer forgives you for charging, the part a wearer never sees but feels. He nods and kisses the bone burnisher to the edge like a superstition. The leather answers by reflecting the window in a soft, believable way. You accept the compliment and keep quiet. Storm becomes rehearsal, then a shift. The dock raises its shoulders and shoves rain sideways. The ditch forgets obedience. You call stop planks, sandbags and the halter line, voices braided by practice. Powels sing cool, wedges seat, a sling rides higher than dignity and waits for the river to remember rules. You set men to the weak pit, stir to thin liquor, before overflow can pretend victory, and lay pine boughs where brick edges think about crumbling. Cuff walks the brace pole by knees like a man who has learned the shape of fear without marrying it. Soot watches from the door, unimpressed by thunder. When the worst passes, you drain a thumb's worth from each pit to equalise tempers and chalk fresh marks you will understand in 6 weeks. At dusk you brew tea black as decisions and pass the tin mug twice along the line. No speeches, only steam. A gull laughs at nothing you can change. You do not answer back. The bathhouse returns you to a skin you forgot. This time you bring the boy, pay 2 pennies, and claim tubs under windows too high for argument. He whispers that the water smells like nothing, as if nothing had learned to be good. You wash his hair with patience, teach him to keep soap from eyes, and explain that vinegar beats lime the way truth beats swagger. He repeats it gravely, then asks if soot may someday enter. You tell him dogs prefer puddles with stories. On the way out he stops at the glass and studies his clean face like a new tool. You hand him the slate strap you made, initials inside, edges burnished honest. He threads it through the whole of his belt with ceremony, and a promise to practice letters without bribery. Your sister thanks you with a bread heel saved from breakfast and a look that says a day stood up straighter. You walk back slower, boots quieter on wet stone. Night brings the room down to its correct size. You write 2 lines to yourself, wrist low, feet set, and a third that counts more. Keep the vinegar near. You fold the scrap into the tin where you keep your sister's first letter, the rent receipt, and the charm Cuff's mother stitched when the pump wore black paint. Soot discovers the warm square by the stove and becomes geometry. You rub dubbin into seams, wipe the blade, and let the half-moon sleep on its cloth with the handle toward morning. Memory arrives like careful rain. Your mother's apron at a sink, bread turning useful in broth, the sound a coal makes when it admits defeat. You breathe slow until the day sets its tools aside. Outside, rope knocks a mast. The watchman names the hour like a man mending numbers. You answer by lying down and not arguing with blankets. Sleep takes inventory, finds you paid in full, for once, and close the ledger without scolding. Market week fattens the leather market with voices and sticks. You carry a stack of finished sides and 2 coils of straps, edges burnished, creases true, and Soot heels you to the gate before deciding commerce is beneath him. Inside, buyers drum thumbs onto grain and speak money in half-inch measures. A saddler asks for harness backs without belly lies. You show shoulder first, then spine, flexing slow so spring tells the truth. He checks with his nose, birch in one piece, plain bark in the rest, and lifts price by a shilling because finish behaved. A bootmaker wants stout soles, you talk thickness, tannage weeks, and dry loft windows cracked to a finger in wet weather. Cuff carries slates and listens. The foreman haggles polite, wins 2 coins and a promise to return after Michaelmas. You knot the lot, chalk the number, and feel a small guilty pride when the cart rolls away like a sentence that finally found its verb. Outside, Soot sits king of the curb and grants you audience. Back home, the court discovers a new opinion about smell. A neighbour blames your coat for a drain that sulks. You point to the trap you hammered last month and the lime wash that still holds. The board's rat catcher appears with a stick, a bag, and a smirk practised at doors. Soot growls low enough to educate him. You volunteer to clear the grating yourself and carry 3 buckets of muck to the night soil cart, holding your breath between steps like a man counting debt. The rat catcher pockets praise that didn't belong to him. The widow from Page's Walk sees and returns decency with tea. You patch a bit of pipe with tar and cloth, bind it with twine, and listen to the gurgle smooth. The neighbour thanks you with a sideways nod and a smaller complaint. You return to your room and hang the coat where the window's thin wind can work. Clean is a dream, less foul is a policy. A crack along your right thumb wakes hot at midnight, red thread climbing towards the wrist like a wick learning ambition. You wash it with vinegar that bites like a friend, then wrap with clean linen, and a prayer you don't advertise. Morning does not like the look. Daylight walks you to the surgery above the chandler. The surgeon smells of spirits and starch and keeps his words in a small box. He lances, squeezes, and lays a bread and sugar poultice that turns courage into paste. No lime today, he says, as if the pits would pause for your thumb. You return to the yard anyway and take the quiet posts, bark room, strap bench, counting slats in the loft while other men stir and haul. Cuff cuts for you, slow and proud. You nod once and let the boy swell a fraction. By evening the red line shrugs and retreats. You thank vinegar aloud and let nobody hear. Daylight's story arrives folded into steam at the bathhouse. He comes on your coin because he wouldn't otherwise, and sits in water with a soldier's face while lie whispers honesty. He says his real name once and it rolls wrong. You both agree Daylight fits. A scar across his shoulder tells rope tales he never wastes on crowds. He shows you a splice trick that tucks truer, then laughs when you steal it. You pay the barber to chase the limeline from your jaw and learn the man's hand sing steadier than some bell ringers you've heard. Leaving, Daylight buys you tea and paper because charity must travel dressed as trade. Outside, the street finds its old nose again. You carry the clean like contraband and fold it under your coat before the city can file a complaint. Storm rehearsal becomes a matinee without tickets. The river shoulders up, ditches remember pride, and a weak pit thinks about leaving its bricks. You call lines the crew already knows, stop planks, sand to the low corner, pine boughs on edges, halter across the lane for carts if the gate quits. The windlass pole clicks righteous. The sling rides high and honest. Men move like ink lines in the margin, measured, necessary. Cuff checks knots before you tell him. Daylight files a burr off the ratchet between orders. Soot barks once at a rat with poor timing. You draw a thumb of liquor off each crowded pit, thin the worst with weak ooze, and chalk fresh marks where the flood lied. When the rain tires, you brew tea black as rope tar, and pass the tin mug down the line. Nobody speaks hero, nobody needs to. The yard keeps its shape. So do you. Night folds your room back into a map you can read. You set the poultice aside, wash the thumb in warm vinegar, and tie a fresh rag that doesn't remember yesterday. You mend a crack in your apron's hem with neat stitches, wax thread between finger and thumb, and feel the nagging pleasure of doing a small thing exactly right. On the table a chapbook waits. You copy 2 paragraphs, weights and their measures, until the letters quit wobbling. You sketch the Powell housing to scale on scrap, plan to file the tooth that miscounted last week. Soot claims the warm square by the stove and snores like a low bell. You oil the knife, fold its cloth and lay it with the handle toward morning, because superstition is just wisdom that learned to survive. Outside, the river mutters about the sea. Inside, you answer by banking the fire and letting the bed take your weight without argument. Sleep comes honest, like a coin you actually earned. Morning begins with Soot patrolling the lane like he owns the rent book. You warm the kettle, rub dubbin in a tin until the wax wakes, then test last night's strap edges with a thumbnail that has finally forgiven you. Fog hangs low enough to pet. Bark dust has opinions before the bell. You oil the knife, breathe into your wraps, and take the beam slow. letting the first hide teach your shoulders the day's grammar. 2 children pass, counting steps with the clothespins for soldiers. They wave because Soot vouched for you last week. In the loft you crack a window a hand, wipe glass with an old shirt that remembers better days, and listen to liquor slap posts in regular decent breaths. Lime waits like a patient liar. You stir until the skin breaks, then draws down, quiet as bread proving under a cloth. The smell arrives dressed as work and sits where it pleases. You nod to it the way you nod to rain, not welcome, not refused. A saddler returns with a strap he sees puckers under the buckle. You take it in both hands, flex along the crease, and feel where the grain gave pride, not service. No sulk, just the wrong belly inch pretending to be back. You trim the tongue, reset the keeper, warm the edge with a bone until it lies, then crease again with a quiet iron so the line promises perseverance. He grumbles price, you grumble time, both of you prefer the strap to the argument. Cuff watches your elbows and learns you solve from the buckle end backward, because failures write their names their loudest. Outside, the saddler tests the fix on his own waist, nods once, and leaves a coin that tries to look accidental. You pocket it without poetry. When the bell calls, you mark the rack where belly starts lying, and move the chalk farther back than your feelings like. Old Cope turns slow on the stair, breath measuring itself in small, careful coins. He waves your hand away, then lets it stay, leaning the weight of years into your palm. Chilblains have come to collect. Lime remembered an old road, the cane tells stories through the floor. You settle him near the Gloomend steam, fetch hot vinegar water, and trade rags for silence while he warms. Cope taps the beam rules on his knee, wrist low, feet set, vinegar near, and smiles like a man paying out rope to someone who will use it. You walk him home 2 doors and pretend it is for your sake, not his. Inside he sits, names the cracks on your hands as if blessing them, and sends you back with the cane like a borrowed sermon. You return it before the hour ends, and he answers the door with it already in his grip. That makes you feel rightly scolded and quietly trusted. Notices sprout on posts. The board reopens a pump 2 streets over, paint scraped from its mouth, fines threatened for throwing slops into ditches with fewer dreams. The bathhouse posts hours in bigger letters. You learn the quiet times by accident and then pretend you planned them. Markets thin after rain. The river coughs and remembers to mind its manners. You walk the ditch with a shovel anyway, lifting what shouldn't travel, binding a leaking joint with tar, rag and twine until the gurgle stops sounding like judgment. A constable pauses at the gate, reads the trap you hammered last month, and tips his hat as if you were a small ordnance worth keeping. You say nothing. The yard answers with work, bark up, liquor stirred, windlass pole counting true. In the afternoon, a ray of clean sun falls across the beam and looks lost. You let it stay. Home is a room that keeps forgetting to argue. Your sister's boy brings his slate. You thread the keeper strap through and show him how to turn corners without starting a fight with the leather. He writes his name, slow and careful, then writes Soot's with a flourish because pride arrives early when letters do. You stitch a small pouch from offcuts, 2 seams, turned, burnished, so he can keep chalk dry and secrets wetter. Your sister hands you tea that tastes like relief diluted with hope. She has a cough she denies and a laugh tough enough to win. The boy asks if leather sleeps. You tell him it remembers. He pets Soot the wrong way. Soot forgives him the way dogs forgive apprentices. On the walk back, you carry the empty pail and listen to the lane trying out evening like a new coat. Yeast, coal, and quiet weather. Night folds itself around simple duties. You scrape the beam clean, sluice the floor, and lay knives to sleep on cloth so tomorrow finds them in a good temper. Vinegar at the basin, rinse slow, tallow in the cracks. The sting arrives like a tax and leaves like one. You count coins into 3 stacks, rent, coal, and the stubborn little book you still plan to buy, and tuck them where thieves would need to pass Soot's sense of humour. A chapbook gives you 10 minutes of words you don't use at the pits. You copy 2 onto scrap and practice the neatness you never show buyers. Outside, a cart complains about a spoke you once tied. It remembers you kindly. You bank the stove, crack the window a hand, and lie down with the smell still wearing your shirt. Sleep comes anyway, steady as a windlass handle. You let it lift you and make no fuss. Dawn walks in on quiet feet and finds you already tying your wrists. The room holds night like a folded cloth. The stove remembers dutifully. Soot yawns, sneezes bark dust from a dream, and escorts you to the gate as if he hired you. Tools wait where your hands left them honest. Beam knife thin and oiled, scudder broad and patient, moon blade sleeping on its rag. You polish handles with a thumb until wood answers warm. The yard breathes a mild fog that makes liquor seem polite. You don't believe it. A thin skin rides the lime. You break it gently with the paddle and watch white folds sink like grudges. Laths sweat. Ropes darken. The windlass pawl clicks a soft amen. You test the beam with a boot sole, sand a sullen patch, and set the first hide neck left the way you were taught. Grain greets steel without argument. Your shoulders remember their work and fall into the old count, push, breathe, set. Somewhere a bell mistakes the hour. You ignore it. When daylight finally admits itself, you're 3 hides in and the knife, and you have agreed to be reasonable. By noon, the errand you have owed yourself for months finally chooses you. You bring 3 honest shillings and a cautious face to the little stationer near the leather market. The clerk weighs your coins like a judge and offers spines in brown paper jackets, spelling, sums, and a thin reader with ships that pretend to smell only of tar. You pick the smallest arithmetic and a stub of decent pencil wrapped in straw. He asks if you need a slate. You shake your head and think of a boy who already keeps one safe. He threads twine round the book as if binding a wound and says, almost kindly, pages don't bite. Outside, you stand under a lintel and sound the first row of numbers like a prayer. 2 and 3 make 5, 5 and 7 make 12. The words feel square in the mouth, trustworthy as pegs. You tuck the book inside your coat where heat can teach it your name, and walk back slower, counting cobbles without tripping. Soot gets his share of the day in brass and leather. You cut a narrow strap from a calm shoulder, crease lines warm, then bevel the edges until they behave. Holes punch true, a small brass buckle gleams like an earned coin. On a washer the size of a thumbnail you scratch his name with the point of your awl. Suit. Each letter walking steady, because hands that learn to stitch can also write. He endures the fitting with the patience of an old priest and the boredom of a child at sermons. The collar sits between scars and pride. You oil the edges and rub the brass with rag until it winks. In the lane he paces beside you, adjusting his idea of you to include a leash you rarely need. A girl asks if he belongs to the yard. You say the yard belongs to him when he's in the mood. She laughs, then pets him with the back of her hand like a professional. Old Cope appears with the afternoon and a parcel wrapped in apron cloth. He sets it on the bench as if placing a hand on a head for blessing. Inside lies a bone burnisher worn to silk and a slicker handle polished by other winters. Had them since the guild kept minutes, he says, smiling at a corner the room cannot see. You run a thumb along the grain of the tool and feel ghosts practice. Cope recites the rules with his cane tapping time. Wrist low, feet set, vinegar near, and adds a fourth you have heard, but never named. Make quiet safe. He means the hour when no one is watching, the small fix you do because the next man might fall where you didn't. You promise without words. He nods as if he heard them anyway, and lets you walk him as far as the glue men's steam. The cane keeps the beat, the dog keeps the door. Evening borrows an hour for family and makes it hold. Your sister pours tea thin as good intentions and presents a heel of bread that pretends company. The boy writes his name, then soots, then tries the word leather, and looks up to see if spelling grants ownership. You take them to the river when weather minds its manners. Cranes stand against the sky like big bones learning to pray. You tell him how hides travel farther than people and return as boots that wander again. He asks whether the river ever forgets what it carries. You say rivers remember in edges and silt, and people remember in scars. Soot trots ahead, collar shining like a small opinion. On the walk back, the boy counts steps between posts. You let him win. At the stairs, your sister rests, palm at her side where the baby once rode, breath even again. She asks if the bathhouse is worth its penny. You tell her the water smells like nothing and that is its miracle. She says she will try when courage grows. Night folds itself smaller and becomes a room you can answer. You wash in fields, wrists, forearms, neck. Vinegar first, then lye, then a clean rinse you don't quite trust. Cracks in the thumb look less angry. The bread and sugar poultice did its quiet work. You open the little arithmetic and copy sums like stitching. Column, carry, tie off. On scrap you draw a windlass pawl to scale and mark where a tooth might fail if weather chooses mischief. The knife sleeps on its cloth with the handle toward morning because superstition has saved men for less reason. Soot curls into geometry by the stove. You bank the fire, crack the window a hand, and let the lane's slow air argue the bark down to a memory you can bear. Sleep comes patient, like a cart that doesn't hurry and still arrives. You write your nephew's initials on the strap scrap again, practicing steadiness in small spaces. The sums begin to behave, so does your breathing. Outside a watchman calls the hour, careful as a man counting stitches in the dark. Morning thins to a grey that doesn't choose a side. You set straps to length at the bench while Cuff counts holes with a pricking wheel that finally minds him. Soot sleeps under the table with both paws dreaming. The foreman reads a note with his mouth pressed flat, then tucks it in the ledger like a leaf. He lifts his chin once toward you in daylight. Cope. The word travels with no ceremony and every meaning. You wipe the knife, fold the cloth, and walk without speaking. At his door the cane leans where it always leans. Inside, a neighbour sits with the calm of someone who has already cried. Cope's hands lie open, palms up, the way men who taught keep their last lesson visible. You sit the chair he kept for you, and say the rules aloud in your head. Wrist low, feet set, vinegar near. Make quiet safe, until they sound like prayer. Soot waits on the step like a watchman who understands doors. The yard works while the bells practice mercy. You tie a black strip on the gate latch and keep time gentle with tools. Men speak softer, the windlass clicks the same. At dinner, you set Cope's bowl on the bench the way habit says, then tuck it under with a nod that costs more than porter. Cuff asks if funerals always fit between bells. You tell him work keeps rooms from getting drunk on sorrow. He nods and cleans the beam slower than pride wants. In the afternoon, you fetch oak from the cooper's waste and plane 2 strips straight as remembering. A lid always needs trust. You give it shape while daylight cuts the mitres and teaches the saw to stop talking. When the light leans, you and 3 men carry weight that is not heavy and set it down where a preacher will edit the truth. The bell finds a pace you can breathe to. You breathe and keep your eyes open. After, the yard returns like weather that never asked your permission. You hold the slicker Cope gave, bone worn to silk, and press it along a shoulder until the grain lies. The tool knows the road, your hands only follow. In the loft you tie a fresh cord where a knot sulked, cut it short, and burn the end with a taper so it minds its manners. Make quiet safe. You hear it as you move. A scud gutter cleared before toes invent a story. A rag hung within reach of vinegar. A coil laid the way a tired man will need it at dusk. You show Cuff the splice daylight taught. Tucks neat, beeswax along the lay, then test it with your weight because trust must not be a wish. He ties it twice more and the second sits honest. You nod and do not smile, teaching wears its own apron. Evening brings your sister and the boy, both dressed like they decided to be seen. You stand with them at the back, caps off, dog quiet as a held breath. The preacher speaks in small, decent lines. The widow wipes eyes that knew his stories before his name. The earth receives what it always planned to hold. After, you walk the boy the long way by the river, and tell him Cope taught without charging and listened before speaking. The boy nods and asks if rules can be inherited like a knife. You say yes, but they still need using. At home you hang the cane Cope left you by your door, not as a badge, There's a reminder that tools outlive men and rules outlive tools. The room looks back at you as if it too has learned a new word. Days thin into weather that smiles without teeth. You finish a harness lot the buyer will flex in a room with brass and windows. At the bench you stitch a small sheath for the slicker's bone so it travels with respect. On the inside you scratch cope with the all-point and rub a breath of tallow to keep the letters humble. Soot brings you a rag you did not ask for and insists it is a toy. You negotiate with a strap of scrap and lose with grace. Cuff runs the jack steady, leaning at the same angle you do, and you feel pride behave for once. At dinner, Daylight tells a rope walk story that ends with a knot you do not plan to meet. You laugh at the right half of it and let the other half sit. When the bell sends you back, the beam greets your hands like a chore that no longer insults you. Night crowds the room and then remembers you pay rent. You open the arithmetic and read numbers aloud until the page moves from noise to map. 2 and 7, carry 1. The carry is a small tug on a rope you can feel. You write your nephew's name once more and suits for balance, then add copes with letters that choose the line. Vinegar takes the day's last sting. Tallow seals what can be persuaded to stay. You lay the half moon on its cloth with the handle toward morning, because faith is a habit and habit keeps men breathing. Outside, the lane practices silence with carts gone and rain undecided. You bank the stove, crack the window a hand, and let a cooler thread of air teach the bark to be polite. Sleep comes without bargaining. When it pauses, you hear the rules again and nod in the dark. They keep working on their own. The yard settles into a season that doesn't announce itself, and you learn to work inside its quiet. You start early at the bench, cutting keepers from calm shoulder, creasing warm lines that tell leather where to behave. Cuff mines the pits with a pole like he's conducting a slow hymn. Daylight tunes the windlass with a thumb on the pole tooth that miscounted last month and no longer dares. You walk the laths, tie a sulking cord, sand a beam slick where paste tried to own the morning. Soot curls under the table in the shape of a comma, the sentence of the day pausing just long enough to breathe. Make quiet safe, Cope said, and you hear it while you set a rag within reach of vinegar and coil a rope in a way a tired man can lift without swearing. The smell keeps its job, you keep yours. Peace isn't clean, it's orderly. Deptford asks for a visit and you carry coal like penance because stairs make heat expensive for your sister. The boy meets you with a slate he keeps neat inside the strap you scratched his initials into. He writes them slow, careful, proud. You oil the door's leather check, tack 2 small corners into obedience, and set the hinge to mind its squeak. She pours tea thin as promises and laughs at your face when it tries to pretend a taste doesn't matter. You trade a penny for 1 clean towel at the bathhouse on the way back and soap that bites in a language your skin understands. Vinegar answers lime like truth answers swagger. Leaving, you smell tar and yeast and think of your father's hands teaching rope by ear. The river shows teeth at the arch and then smiles. You count steps home for the pleasure of having them to count. Night asks you to name what it smells like. You stand at the open window, hands damp from the basin, and compose a truth. Bark like tea brewed too long, lime like eggs with a grudge, bate like a churchyard that refuses to keep quiet. You breathe through the mouth because the nose tells stories you don't need before sleep. The straw tick is resigned rather than hostile. Fleas are fewer since you cooked vinegar with cloves and made your blanket decide to cooperate. Your hands ache along old paths. You lay them flat on the pillow so the skin stretches without cracking. In that stretch second, the room almost forgets the yard. You file the feeling like a coin that might buy you morning. Soot snorts in his sleep as if he agrees. You bank the fire, crack the window a hand, and let the lane tell you nothing dangerous. New lads arrive with hands that think they're brave. The foreman points and you become a book without pages. Wrist low, feet set, vinegar near. You say it again until the words stop sounding like a chant and start sounding like muscle. You show beam stance with boots planted, knee soft, back honest. You teach the test stroke, blade riding, not biting, grain answering clean. You put the vinegar bucket 1 step left because panic forgets right from wrong. When a lad uses his thumb to test an edge, you tap the nail with your own knife spine until he looks insulted and then grateful. You tell Cope's fourth rule, make quiet safe, while you scrub the scud gutter where a slip waits to write a man's name. They watch you more than they listen. That's fine. Knives learn hands, not speeches. Michaelmas brings a pause shaped like roast chestnuts and rain that minds its manners for an hour. You buy a twist of nuts from a brazier who trusts you with his tongs and burns your fingers with kindness. Soot sits like a saint until a nut leaps. He scouts it with his nose and declines on principle. A fiddler saws a tune near the arch. A woman sells ribbons brighter than cents. Boys race paper boats in a gutter that pretends to be a river. You cut a scrap strap for the boy with a notch he can set as a promise he won the race he lost. He takes the consolation like a professional. You check the sky, decide the yard will not drown before supper, and allow yourself a longer walk home than rent recommends. Streets smell of yeast, coal, and a polite joke you almost catch. At the table you open the little arithmetic like a door you built yourself. 2 and 9 carry 1, 12 minus 5 leave 7, rows and columns behaving like lines of stitches that hold. You copy the sums clean, pencil shaved to a spear, and set down between lines, never across. You sketch the windlass pole again, because drawing it teaches you the tooth's shape in your hand. A letter from a binder sits under the stone jar. He wants backs that forgive hinges and a colour that doesn't lie under gaslight. You can fill that order if the weather remembers to be adult. You grease the thumb that thinks about complaining, wrap the wrist with twine and linen, and tell your hands they have earned a page that doesn't bite. Soot's collar wink says yes. The window says rain. The bed says enough. Cold writes its name on the inside of your window, and the yard decides to answer with stubbornness. Lime grows sullen, so you stir longer for a thinner truth. Bark liquor sweetens and needs more fresh dust to remember its job. You line pit edges with pine boughs to keep frost from prying bricks apart, and you warm the beam with a rag dipped in hot water, so fingers don't stick to honesty. Chilblains come to collect on toes that believed boots were enough. You knit a rag into a second sock and pretend you always knew how. Soot sleeps nearer the stove because wisdom has paws. Cuff learns to work breath like a tool, fogging on the blade just enough to see where the grain lies about its plan. The foreman nods once at noon in a way that spends nothing and still pays you. A lath loses its temper in the loft and the hide sags toward the floor, not yet a fall but rehearsing. You catch the cord, tie a fresh knot, and slide a wedge under the rail where the grain of the beam wanted to split. Make quiet safe, you say out loud, and feel odd and then better. The sulphur pan gets a small rehearsal just to frighten mould. Blue flame sulks and forgets its pride. You chalk the lath end so a tired hand tomorrow will notice. You cut a new cord because old obedience fails without warning. Downstairs you set a rag by the vinegar that doesn't remember yesterday, and feel like a man who built a handrail on a stair most people climb in the dark. No miracle, just fewer falls. The binder's order pulls you through the afternoon. You pick backs with quiet shoulders, dress edges with bone until the light lies politely, and run the jack slow, rollers humming a low yes. For colour you keep bark honest, no sumac pride to confuse gaslight. The grain reads clean like wet slate. A test bend near the spine sings the dry song good leather sings. You let it finish and then stop it from bragging. Cuff warms the creasing iron, runs 2 lines to teach the edge manners, and looks up the way men look when work finally greets them back. You think of Cope's bone slicker in its little sheath, and rub a breath of tallow into it, letters inside staying humble. A man from the shop comes with a cart and says the binder likes leather that doesn't pretend to be more than it is. You tell him you like buyers who say so out loud. Your sister fights a cough she calls unimportant until the cough decides to argue. You make broth from a hen that lost an election, add onion and a pinch of pepper you had hidden from yourself, and carry the pot across 2 courts in a weather that doesn't sign its name. The boy reads to her from a penny sheet, lips brave, and you discover that words spoken by someone you love weigh more than soup. Soot keeps the doorway like a concierge you can afford. You fix the window rope so it lifts without scolding and tuck a rag at the sill where the draft built a house. She drinks, smiles, loses the smile, and drinks again. You sit without talking and let the room admit it is still winning. Later you wash the bowl at your basin and tell the water to mind its attitude. It listens almost. You walk the river in a night that earns its quiet. Cranes hold their arms like men pausing mid-prayer. Masts draw a forest against a sky that forgot colour for a few hours. The tide lies low and honest. Ropes creak their small useful arguments. You think the word legacy and decide you would rather keep rules. Wrist low, feet set, vinegar near make quiet safe. The smell follows, but fainter. The bark becomes a story rather than a sentence. You pass the arch where you bought chestnuts and the place where the fiddler taught your boots to keep time. The city breathes slow enough for once that your lungs match it. You carry the pace home like a cup you refuse to spill. Back at the room, you set the cane by the door so your hand can find it when memory asks for weight. You wash in fields, rub tallow into the thumb that betrayed you last week and repented, and fold the arithmetic under the stone jar that keeps paper from wandering. Soot finds his square by the stove and becomes a dark proof that warmth answers work. You bank the fire, crack the window a hand, and let a ribbon of better air argue the yard out of your shirt. You tell the bed you will be kind if it returns the favour. It does, mostly. Your breath falls into the old windlass rhythm. Turn, click, breathe. And you discover with some surprise that the count can carry a man towards sleep as easily as it carries a sling of hides toward light. You've been standing in Bermondsey long enough to know the lime by smell and the bark by touch. Long enough for vinegar to feel like a friend that bites first and forgives later. Your hands have learned new names for the same skin. Wrist low, feet set. Keep the bucket where panic can find it without thinking. Make quiet safe. If you came here wondering how men turned rot into boots and hides into page covers, you've seen it in the small, steady ways that don't love speeches. If you came asking whether the smell ever leaves, the answer is simple. Not really, just learns to whisper. Now I'm going to hand you back your own air. Keep one bit of the yard if you like, the count of the windlass maybe, or the rule that tools should sleep where morning can find them. The rest can stay here with the pits and the dog who thinks he supervises you. Walk out with me. The gate latch is the same splintered wood you met on the first night, only now your palm knows exactly where not to press. The ditch gurgles like an old man content to have a job. The trap you hammered keeps its oath because you asked it to. Across the lane, the glue men's copper breathes patient steam. Farther on, the binder's room sits bright and sharp and quieter than church. A bell rings somewhere badly and you forgive it because not every sound needs to be right to do its work. The river breathes slow, lifting and laying the city like a blanket someone remembered to shake. If you listen, you can hear the creak of a pole that decided to count honestly today. If you breathe through your nose, you'll catch bark, tea and coal and yeast and a thread of something clean that might be rain and might be mercy. You pass the bench and see the knife asleep on its rag with the handle toward morning. That habit looks silly until the one time it saves a cut. You see the vinegar by the basin and remember cuffs near miss, the cloth folded, the voice that kept talking about anything but fear while the acid spoke its cure. You see the cord you tied in the loft where a lath sulked and a hide rehearsed falling. The knot sits there like a small proof you didn't leave the next man blind. You see the bone slicker. Cope left you in its sheath. Letters hidden inside so gratitude doesn't have to shout. The rules aren't beautiful, they're useful. That turns out to be a kind of beauty you can keep. The yard taught you that on days when praise cost nothing and silence paid better. Your sister's room holds steam and soap, the boy's slate with a strap that still knows your knife, and a laugh that arrives even when the cough auditions for a different role. Soot's collar winks from the step like brass that forgave a rainy day. You never learned a grand lesson from any of them, only small ones that don't mind repeating. Bring coal, fix the hinge, walk the bucket, let the boy read, eat the worst apple first. This city keeps a ledger with more columns than a bookbinder could stitch, and most of the entries are chores. That makes it sound dreary. It isn't. It's survivable, which is the word people use when they're being honest about hope. If you've carried anything from this place, let it be the way hands learn to be exact when the work refuses flattery. We're almost at your door. I'll say the quiet part out loud because nights like this can hold it. You did enough. The pits still want more, and the market wants better, and the board wants cleaner, and the river wants everything you drop. But today you stirred what needed stirring, tied what needed tying, rinsed what needed rinsing, and taught at least one boy where the floor turns honest. If you feel guilty for keeping a clean towel under the stone jar, or for buying a small book that adds without scolding, forgive yourself the way you forgive a strap that puckered once and then learned its place. Lay your knife down where morning can find it. Hang the cane by the door where your hand will meet it when memory asks for weight and steadiness. Scratch your nephew's initials one more time on a scrap, then stop. Now put the city back where it belongs. Close the window to a hand, enough to let the night argue the smell down to a memory. Wash in fields, wrists, forearms, neck, and let vinegar make its small case. Rub tallow where the skin talks too loudly. Bank the stove, it will remember you in the morning. Let soot become geometry in the warm square. Listen for the windlass count in your breath. Turn, click, breathe, and let it slow until the numbers forget what they were counting. If your mind brings back the pits, let them sit. They can work without you for a few hours. You owe them the courtesy of trusting them to keep their own bad habits. Lay yourself down. You're not a man at a beam now. You're someone in a room that is only as large as it needs to be. The bed agrees to hold you. The window agrees to mind drafts. The city agrees to hum far enough away that you can mistake it for the sea. Somewhere a watchman calls an hour that has no claws. Somewhere a cart finds a better road. Somewhere a boy turns a strap through a slate hole without tearing leather or patience. Rate the smell one last time if it helps. Give it a lower number than you did at the start, because it has learned to whisper and you have learned that whispers are not commands. Close your eyes, wrist low, feet set, keep the vinegar near for morning, make quiet safe, the rest will wait.